Chapter 1. The Cupboard's Final Night. Harry could have tried to explain that it wasn't his fault. He could have told Uncle Vernon that he hadn't meant for Aunt Marge's perfectly coiffed hair to turn that shocking shade of emerald green right there at the dinner table. He could have pointed out that he'd been sitting quietly, cutting his meagre portion of roast beef with the dull knife they always gave him, when Aunt Marge had started in again about his criminal tendencies and how he was just like his worthless father. But Harry had learned, in his 8 years of living in the cupboard under the stairs at No. 4 Privet Drive, that explanations only made Uncle Vernon angrier. The bruise on his shoulder blade, where Uncle Vernon's meaty fist had connected 3 days ago, still throbbed with each shallow breath. The darkness of the cupboard pressed against him like a living thing, thick and suffocating, and absolutely complete. No light crept in around the edges of the door anymore. Uncle Vernon had seen to that, with additional boards and a new, heavier lock that clicked with a finality that made Harry's stomach clench with something worse than hunger. 3 days. 3 days since he'd seen sunlight, or felt anything other than the rough wooden floor beneath his thin frame. 3 days since he'd tasted anything but the stale water in the chipped bowl they'd shoved through the slot the first night, before Uncle Vernon had decided that even that was too generous. Harry shifted against the wall, trying to find a position that didn't make his ribs ache. He was getting smaller, he knew. His clothes, hand-me-downs from Dudley that had never fit properly anyway, hung on him like sacks. When he wrapped his arms around his knees and pressed his face against them, he could feel how sharp his bones had become beneath his skin. The house above him was quiet now. Aunt Petunia's nervous footsteps had stopped clicking across the kitchen tiles an hour ago, and even Dudley's heavy stomping had ceased as he'd settled in front of the television for his evening programs. Uncle Vernon's angry muttering about freaks and ungrateful brats had finally faded into silence. Harry closed his eyes, though it made no difference in the absolute darkness, and tried to remember what green grass looked like, what the sky looked like, what food tasted like when your stomach didn't feel like it was eating itself from the inside. He was drifting, somewhere between sleep and unconsciousness, when the sound came. Pop. It was small, barely audible, like a soap bubble bursting. But in the perfect silence of the cupboard, it might as well have been a gunshot. Harry's eyes snapped open, not that he could see anything, and he pressed himself against the back wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Oh," said a voice, a strange voice, high and thin and quavering with something that might have been horror. Oh no, 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 no. A warm light bloomed in the cupboard, soft and golden, and so sudden that Harry had to squeeze his eyes shut against it. When he finally dared to open them, squinting through the glare, he saw something impossible. There was a creature sitting in front of him, no taller than his waist, with enormous green eyes that bulged from a face like a wrinkled apple. Its ears were pointed and bat-like, its nose long and thin, and it wore what looked like a dirty pillowcase with holes cut for its arms. But it was the creature's eyes that made Harry's breath catch in his throat. They were filled with an anguish so deep it made Harry's own pain seem small by comparison. "You is too small," the creature whispered, and its voice cracked like old wood. "You is too thin. You is hurting." Harry tried to speak, tried to ask what this thing was, how it had gotten into the locked cupboard, whether he was finally going mad from hunger. But his voice came out as nothing more than a rasp, his throat too dry to form words. The creature, Harry's mind struggled to process what he was seeing, leaned forward, and its enormous eyes grew even wider. "They is not feeding you," it said, and there was rage there now, cutting through the grief. They is locking you away like Dobby was locked away. But Dobby is used to it. Dobby is knowing he deserves it. But you—" the creature's voice dropped to a whisper. "You is just a baby." "Dobby!" Harry managed to croak, and the creature, Dobby, nodded frantically. "Dobby is a house elf, sir. Dobby is serving the Malfoy family, but Dobby is hearing things, terrible things, about the great Harry Potter living with Muggles who—" Dobby's large eyes filled with what looked like tears. "Dobby is not believing it, sir. Dobby is thinking, surely the great Harry Potter is living in a palace, with servants and fine food and soft beds, because Harry Potter is the boy who lived. Harry Potter is the one who stopped the Dark Lord. Harry Potter is—" "I don't know what you're talking about," Harry whispered. The words scraped his throat raw, but he had to get them out. "I'm not great. I'm not anyone. I'm just Harry." Dobby stared at him for a long moment, and then, to Harry's horror, the creature began to cry. Not quiet tears, but great, heaving sobs that shook his entire small body. "They is not telling you," Dobby wailed. "They is not telling you who you is, what you is, why you is important. They is treating you worse than they would treat an animal. And you is not knowing. You is not knowing that you is the most famous wizard in all the world." "Wizard?" The word came out as barely a breath. "That's not— there aren't really—" But even as Harry said it, even as his rational mind, the part that had learned to accept the Dursleys' version of reality, protested, something deeper inside him thrilled with recognition. Because he'd always known, hadn't he? He'd always known there was something different about him. Something that made strange things happen when he was angry or scared or desperate. Something that made Aunt Petunia look at him with that mixture of fear and disgust. Something that made Uncle Vernon's face turn purple whenever Harry did something that couldn't quite be explained. Dobby wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and looked at Harry with something like wonder. "You's having magic, sir. You's having more magic than almost anyone, and they is trying to starve it out of you, to beat it out of you, to make you small and scared and broken, so you is never knowing your own power." Harry stared at the strange creature in front of him, this impossible thing that had appeared in his locked cupboard like something out of a dream. The golden light, coming from Dobby himself, Harry realized, made the small space feel less like a prison and more like sanctuary. "I don't understand," Harry said, and his voice was stronger now, though still barely a whisper. "I don't understand any of this." Dobby's expression shifted, determination replacing grief. "You is not staying here," he said firmly. "Dobby is not leaving you in this terrible place one more night. Dobby is taking you somewhere safe, somewhere you will be fed and cared for and treated like the important wizard you is." "But where?" Harry asked, fear creeping into his voice. "Where could I possibly go? They'll find me, they'll bring me back, and then Uncle Vernon will never touch you again," Dobby said, and there was steel in his voice now, a fierceness that made his bat-like ears quiver. "Dobby is promising. Dobby is taking you to his master's house, where there is always food and warm rooms and soft beds, where no one will hurt you ever again." Harry's mind reeled. "Your master? But won't he be angry? Won't he send me back?" Dobby's ears drooped slightly. "Dobby is not knowing for certain, sir. But Dobby is knowing that his master is having a son, just your age, and Dobby is knowing that Mistress Narcissa is kind to children. She is not liking to see young ones suffer." The name meant nothing to Harry, but the way Dobby said it, with reverence and hope, made something tight in his chest loosen just slightly. "I'm scared," Harry admitted, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I'm so scared, and I'm so tired, and I don't know what's happening." Dobby reached out, his thin fingers brushing against Harry's cheek with surprising gentleness. "You is not being scared any more, Harry Potter," he said softly. "Dobby is taking you home." And before Harry could protest, before he could think about what he was leaving behind, or what he might be walking into, Dobby's hand closed around his wrist. The world twisted, colours bleeding into each other like watercolours in the rain, and Harry felt himself being pulled through space by magic he didn't understand toward a fate he couldn't imagine. The last thing he heard was the distant sound of the cupboard door, still locked tight, protecting nothing but empty darkness. When the world stopped spinning, when his feet touched solid ground again, and the nauseating sensation of magical travel faded, Harry found himself standing on a vast lawn in the darkness. Above him, stars wheeled across a sky so clear and wide it made him dizzy after days in the cupboard. The grass beneath his bare feet was soft and damp with evening dew, and the air was clean and sweet and full of scents he couldn't identify, but that made his chest expand with something that might have been hope. Before him rose a house that wasn't a house but a palace, all soaring towers and graceful arches and windows that glowed with warm, golden light. It was beautiful in a way that made Harry's eyes water, beautiful and impossible, and so far removed from anything in his experience that he couldn't quite convince himself it was real. "Welcome to Malfoy Manor, Harry Potter," Dobby said softly beside him. "Welcome to your new beginning." Chapter 2. Manor of Shadows. Harry had thought the outside of the house was grand, but stepping through the massive oak doors felt like entering another world entirely. The entrance hall stretched before him like a cathedral, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadows far above. Portraits in gilded frames lined the walls, their subjects watching him with painted eyes that seemed to follow his movement. A crystal chandelier hung overhead, its hundreds of facets catching and throwing light in patterns that made Harry dizzy. He had never seen so much space that belonged to one family. The hallway alone was larger than the entire downstairs of No. 4 Privet Drive. The floor beneath his bare feet was polished marble, cold and smooth, and every surface gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that spoke of countless hours of careful attention. The air smelled of beeswax and something floral that made him think, inexplicably, of safety. Dobby's hand on his shoulder was gentle but insistent, guiding him forward even as Harry's legs threatened to give out beneath him. The magical travel had left him shaky, and the sudden transition from the cramped darkness of the cupboard to this overwhelming grandeur made his head spin. "Master will be in his study," Dobby murmured, his voice echoing strangely in the vast space. Dobby must tell Master what Dobby has done before Master finds out another way. Harry wanted to ask what that meant, what would happen when this Master discovered what Dobby had done, but his throat was too dry and his mind too overwhelmed to form the words. Instead, he let himself be led deeper into the house, past doorways that revealed glimpses of rooms filled with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. They stopped before a set of double doors made of dark wood that had been carved with intricate patterns. Dobby raised one small fist and knocked, the sound sharp and final in the quiet hall. "Enter," came a voice from within, cool, cultured, with an edge that made Harry's stomach clench with familiar dread. Dobby pushed open the doors and stepped inside, tugging Harry along with him. The room beyond was smaller than the entrance hall, but no less impressive. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 of the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes whose titles Harry couldn't read in the dim light. A fire crackled in an ornate fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the Persian rug that covered most of the floor, and behind a massive mahogany desk sat a man who made Harry's breath catch in his throat. He was tall. Harry could tell that even though he was seated, with long, pale hair that fell past his shoulders like spun platinum. His face was aristocratic and cold, all sharp angles and pale skin, and his eyes were the color of winter sky. He wore robes of deep green that looked like they cost more than the Dursleys' car, and when he looked up from the papers he'd been reading, his gaze fixed on Harry with an intensity that made the boy want to hide. "Dobby," the man said, and his voice carried the kind of authority that Harry associated with headmasters and policemen. "What is the meaning of this intrusion? And who is this child?" Dobby's ears drooped, and he began wringing his hands in a gesture that spoke of deep anxiety. "Master Lucius, sir. Dobby is sorry to disturb. But Dobby had to act, sir. Dobby could not leave him there, could not let them hurt him any more, sir." "Him?" Lucius Malfoy, for Harry had begun to piece together that this must be the master Dobby had mentioned, rose from his chair with fluid grace. He was indeed tall, towering over both Harry and Dobby, and when he moved around the desk to get a closer look, his presence filled the room like cold water. "Dobby, you will explain yourself. Immediately." "This is Harry Potter, sir," Dobby whispered, and Harry saw something flicker across Lucius's face. Surprise, calculation, something that might have been hunger. "The Harry Potter, master. And they was starving him, sir. They was locking him in a cupboard, and not giving him food, and beating him when he couldn't help the magic that comes out of him. And Dobby could not. Dobby could not." "Harry Potter," Lucius repeated, and Harry felt exposed under that pale gaze, as if this man could see through his skin to the fear and confusion churning beneath. "The boy who lived. In my house. Brought by my house elf." He paused, and Harry saw his lips curve in something that wasn't quite a smile. How interesting. Harry didn't understand what any of that meant. Boy who lived? The way both Dobby and now this man spoke his name, like it should mean something to him. But he understood the tone. Uncle Vernon had used the same tone when he'd discovered that Mrs. Figg couldn't watch Harry one summer afternoon. The same calculating pleasure at an unexpected opportunity. "Please," Harry managed to whisper, though his voice cracked on the word. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. I can go back, I can—" "Go back?" Lucius's eyebrows rose. "To what exactly? From what Dobby has told me, your guardians have been somewhat negligent in their care?" The word negligent was spoken with such delicate distaste that Harry almost flinched. He wrapped his arms around himself, acutely aware of how he must look in his oversized, dirty clothes, with his too thin arms and the shadows under his eyes that he'd caught glimpses of in the mirror. They don't," Harry started, but he didn't know how to finish. How could he explain the cupboard, the locks, the way Uncle Vernon's face turned purple when Harry did something he couldn't control? How could he tell this elegant man with his expensive clothes and his cold eyes about the way Aunt Petunia looked at him, like he was something that had crawled out from under a rock? "They don't what?" Lucius asked, and there was something almost gentle in his voice, though Harry thought it was the gentleness of a cat with a mouse. "Feed you? Clothe you properly? Treat you with the respect due to the most famous young wizard in Britain?" "I don't know what that means," Harry said, and the words came out small and lost. "I don't know why people keep saying I'm famous. I don't know anything about wizards or magic or any of this. I just want—" He trailed off because what did he want? To go home. Number 4. Privet Drive had never been home, not really. To understand what was happening to him. To not be afraid any more. Before Lucius could respond, the doors behind them opened with a soft whisper of hinges. Harry turned, and his breath caught in his throat for an entirely different reason. The woman who entered was beautiful in a way that made Harry think of paintings in museums, all pale elegance and graceful movement. Her hair was blonde, like Lucius's but warmer, falling in soft waves to her shoulders. She wore robes of midnight blue that made her skin look like porcelain, and when her eyes, blue like her husband's but warmer, fell on Harry. They widened with something that might have been shock. "Lucius," she said, and her voice was like music, low and melodious with just a hint of concern. "Dobby said there was... What is this child doing here?" Harry saw her take in his appearance, the oversized clothes hanging off his thin frame, the way he was swaying slightly on his feet, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and empty days. He saw her expression change from mild curiosity to something sharper, more focused, and he tensed automatically, waiting for the familiar look of disgust or irritation. Instead, what crossed her face was horror. "My God," she breathed, and before Harry quite knew what was happening, she had crossed the room and dropped to her knees in front of him, bringing herself down to his eye level. "Sweetheart, when was the last time you ate?" The endearment hit Harry like a physical blow. No one had ever called him sweetheart. No one had ever knelt down to speak to him at his own level. No one had ever looked at him with the kind of soft concern that was written across this woman's features. I don't," Harry stammered, and found to his horror that his eyes were filling with tears. 3 days, maybe. I think it was 3 days. 3 days, she repeated, and her voice was deadly quiet. "You haven't eaten in 3 days?" Harry nodded, not trusting his voice, and saw something blazing kindle in her blue eyes. She reached out, slowly, telegraphing her movements, and when Harry didn't flinch away, she cupped his face in her hands. Her touch was warm and gentle, so different from Uncle Vernon's meaty fists or Aunt Petunia's sharp fingers that Harry couldn't help but lean into it. "Narcissa," Lucius said from behind them, and there was warning in his voice, though Harry couldn't understand what he was warning against. "The child is starving," Narcissa cut him off, not taking her eyes from Harry's face. "And exhausted, and frightened, and he can't be more than 8 years old." She turned to look at her husband, and Harry saw steel beneath the softness. Whatever political implications this might have, whatever opportunities you're already calculating, can wait. Right now, there is a child who needs food and care. Harry didn't understand what she meant about political implications. He didn't understand any of this, really. But he understood that she was defending him, that this beautiful woman with her gentle hands and fierce eyes was putting herself between him and something, even though she didn't know him, even though he was nothing but a dirty, unwanted boy who'd been dropped on her doorstep. "Mother." The voice came from the doorway, young and curious, and so normal after everything else that Harry's head snapped toward it gratefully. A boy stood there, about Harry's own age, with the same pale hair as both adults and grey eyes that were bright with curiosity rather than cold with calculation. "What's happening? Dobby said you wanted to see me, but then I heard voices." The boy, Draco, Harry's mind supplied, though he wasn't sure how he knew that, stepped into the room and caught sight of Harry. His eyes widened, and Harry waited for the familiar look of derision or amusement that he was used to seeing on Dudley's face whenever Dudley's friends got their first look at Harry's second-hand clothes and too small frame. Instead, Draco looked fascinated. "Are you really Harry Potter?" he asked, and there was none of Dudley's mockery in his voice, just genuine curiosity. "The one from the stories?" "I don't know," Harry admitted, and his voice was barely a whisper. "Everyone keeps saying that, but I don't know what it means. I don't know any stories." Something passed across Draco's face then, something that looked almost like anger, though Harry didn't think it was directed at him. "They didn't tell you," Draco said, and it wasn't a question. "About what you did, about why you're famous. They didn't tell you anything." "Draco," Narcissa said quietly, never taking her hands from Harry's face, "would you ask one of the house elves to prepare a meal? Something gentle, soup, perhaps, and fresh bread. This young man needs to eat." "Yes, Mother," Draco said, but he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he looked at Harry with something that might have been sympathy. "It's not fair," he said suddenly, "that they didn't tell you. You should know who you are." And then he was gone, leaving Harry alone with the two adults and a silence that felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. Narcissa was still kneeling in front of him, still holding his face in her warm hands, and when she spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "You're safe now," she said, and Harry wanted desperately to believe her. "Whatever has happened to you, wherever you've been, you're safe now. Do you understand me?" Harry nodded, though he wasn't sure he did understand, wasn't sure he dared to hope that this beautiful woman, with her gentle touch and fierce protectiveness, could possibly mean what she seemed to be saying. But when she smiled at him, the first real smile anyone had given him in as long as he could remember, Harry felt something tight and painful in his chest begin to loosen. Just a little. "Good," Narcissa said. "Now let's get you fed and cleaned up, and then we'll figure out what comes next." As she stood and held out her hand to him, Harry caught sight of Lucius over her shoulder. The man's expression was unreadable, but there was something in his pale eyes that made Harry think of wheels turning, of plans being made. It should have been frightening, and part of Harry was frightened, but Narcissa's hand was warm in his, and for the first time in his life, someone was promising to take care of him, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Harry thought that might be worth almost any risk. Chapter 3. The Healer's Verdict. The soup was unlike anything Harry had ever tasted. Rich and warm, with tender vegetables and bits of chicken that practically dissolved on his tongue, it was the kind of meal he'd only seen in pictures or glimpsed through restaurant windows. Narcissa sat beside him at the small table in what she'd called the morning room, watching with sharp eyes as he forced himself to eat slowly, despite every instinct screaming at him to devour it all as quickly as possible. "Small sips," she reminded him gently when he reached for the bowl too eagerly. "I know you're hungry, sweetheart, but your stomach needs time to adjust." The endearment still made Harry's chest tight with something he didn't have words for. No one had ever called him sweetheart before. No one had ever watched him eat with concern instead of irritation, or made sure he had a cushion for his back, or tucked a soft blanket around his shoulders when they noticed him shivering. "Better?" Narcissa asked when he'd managed to finish half the bowl, and Harry nodded, not trusting his voice. He felt warmer than he had in days, the knot of hunger in his stomach finally beginning to ease, though the food sat strangely in his belly after so long with nothing. "Good," she said, and her smile was soft and genuine. "Now, I've sent for someone I'd like you to meet. His name is Healer Pie, and he's going to examine you to make sure you're not hurt anywhere. Is that all right?" Harry's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. "Examine me." The word came out small and frightened, and he saw Narcissa's expression gentle even further. "Just to check that you're healthy," she assured him quickly. "Healer Pie is a very kind man, and he's taken care of Draco since he was a baby. He won't hurt you, I promise." "But I am not hurt," Harry lied automatically, the way he'd learned to lie when teachers asked about bruises or when neighbors looked at him with too much concern. "I'm fine." Narcissa's blue eyes searched his face, and Harry had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see right through his words to the truth beneath them. "I'm sure you are, sweetheart," she said quietly. "But it would make me feel better to have him take a look, just to be certain. Will you let me stay with you?" Harry nodded quickly, relief flooding through him. The idea of being examined by a stranger was terrifying enough, but at least with Narcissa there, he wouldn't be alone. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts, and a house elf Harry hadn't seen before poked her head in. "Mistress," she squeaked, "Healer Pie is being here." "Thank you, Tippy. Show him in, please." The man who entered was nothing like what Harry had expected. Older than Lucius and Narcissa, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, he wore plain blue robes and carried a leather bag that looked well used. When he smiled at Harry, it crinkled the corners of his eyes in a way that made him look like someone's grandfather. "You must be young, Harry," Healer Pye said, his voice warm and gentle. "I'm Augustus Pye. Mrs. Malfoy tells me you've had quite an adventure tonight." Harry glanced at Narcissa, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, sir," he managed. "Well then, let's make sure you're none the worse for wear, shall we?" Healer Pye set his bag down on the table and opened it, revealing an array of instruments that glowed with soft, multicolored light. "Have you ever seen magical healing before, Harry?" "I don't know anything about magic," Harry admitted, staring in fascination at a crystal that pulsed with blue light. "I only found out about it tonight." Something flickered across Healer Pye's face. Surprise, perhaps, or concern. He glanced at Narcissa, who was watching Harry with an expression that had gone very still and very dangerous. "I see," the healer said carefully. "Well, magical healing is quite different from what muggles, non-magical people, use. These instruments will tell me if you're hurt anywhere, even places that might not be obvious to the eye. May I?" Harry nodded nervously and allowed Healer Pye to guide him to a larger chair. The man's touch was gentle as he positioned Harry's arms and began passing what looked like a glowing wand over his body, murmuring words under his breath that Harry couldn't understand. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The instruments hummed softly and cast shifting patterns of light across Harry's skin, and Healer Pye's expression remained professionally calm. But as the examination continued, Harry noticed changes, subtle at first, then increasingly pronounced. The healer's jaw tightened. His movements became more careful, more thorough. He passed the glowing wand over Harry's ribs 3 times, frowning at whatever it was telling him. When he reached Harry's back, his breath hitched in a way that made Harry's stomach clench with familiar dread. "How long have you been living with your relatives, Harry?" Healer Pye asked quietly, not looking up from his work. "Since I was a baby, I think," Harry answered. "Aunt Petunia says my parents died in a car crash when I was 1, and she had to take me in." "I see." The healer's voice was carefully neutral, but Harry caught the sharp look he exchanged with Narcissa. "And they've been caring for you all this time?" "Yes, sir." The lie came automatically, the way it always did when adults asked questions that felt like traps. But even as he said it, Harry felt heat rise in his cheeks. How could he call what the Dursleys did caring? How could he pretend that being locked in a cupboard and denied food was normal when sitting here in this warm room with soup still warming his belly made the contrast so stark? Healer Pye finished his examination and set his instruments aside. The look on his face was one Harry had seen before, on Mrs. Figg when she'd caught sight of his bruises, on the teacher who'd asked about his ill-fitting clothes, on the librarian who'd noticed how thin he was. It was the look of an adult who suspected something terrible but couldn't quite approve it. "Narcissa," Healer Pye said quietly, "might I speak with you privately for a moment?" "Of course." "Harry, sweetheart, would you be all right here by yourself for just a few minutes? We'll be right outside." Harry nodded, though his heart began to race as soon as the door closed behind them. He couldn't hear their words, but he could hear the tone of their voices through the thick wood. Healer Pye speaking in low, urgent tones, and Narcissa's responses growing sharper and more dangerous with each exchange. When they returned, Narcissa's face was pale except for 2 bright spots of color high on her cheekbones. Healer Pye looked grim, and when he knelt down in front of Harry's chair, his expression was infinitely gentle. "Harry," he said carefully, "I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to tell me the truth, even if it's difficult. Can you do that for me?" Harry's mouth went dry. "Am I in trouble?" "No, child, you're not in trouble. You could never be in trouble for what's been done to you." The healer's voice was soft but firm. "But I need to understand how you've been hurt, so that I can help you heal." Hurt? Harry's voice came out as a squeak. I'm not hurt. I told you, I'm fine. Harry, Narcissa said gently, settling into the chair beside him. Healer Pie's instruments show him things that our eyes can't see. They've shown him old injuries, places where you've been hurt before. We just want to help. Harry felt tears prick at his eyes. He'd spent so long pretending that nothing was wrong, so long telling himself that other children must live the way he did. That admitting the truth felt like admitting defeat. They don't mean to, he whispered finally. Uncle Vernon gets angry sometimes, and Aunt Petunia says I ask for it by being freakish, and they're not even supposed to have me, so I should be grateful and— Stop. Narcissa's voice was sharp enough to cut glass, and when Harry looked up at her, he was startled to see tears streaming down her face. Stop right there. Nothing you could ever do would make you deserve to be hurt. Nothing. But I make things happen, Harry protested. Strange things. Things that shouldn't be possible. I made Aunt Marge's hair turn green, and last month I made Dudley's pudding disappear. And once when they locked me in my cupboard, I made the lock come undone somehow, and— Magic, Healer Pie said quietly. You were doing magic, Harry. Accidental magic is perfectly normal for young wizards, especially when they're distressed or frightened. Normal? Harry stared at him. But Aunt Petunia said— Your aunt, Narcissa said, and her voice was deadly quiet. Was wrong. Magic is not freakish. You are not freakish. You are a wizard, Harry, and magic is as natural to you as breathing. Harry felt something inside him crack open at those words. All his life, he'd been told that the strange things that happened around him were proof that he was wrong, broken, unwanted. To hear this beautiful woman with her gentle hands and fierce eyes tell him that those same things were natural, normal, was almost too much to believe. Now, Healer Pie said, his voice professionally calm but with steel underneath, I need to document what's been done to you, not to get you in trouble, but to make sure it never happens again. Can you tell me about the cupboard? Slowly, haltingly, Harry found himself telling them everything. About the locks on his cupboard door, and how he slept on the thin mattress with his broken spring. About the bars on his window and the cat flap they used to slide his meager meals through when they remembered to feed him at all. About the times Uncle Vernon's belt had found its mark, and the way Aunt Petunia's sharp fingers left bruises that he learned to hide under 2 large sleeves. With each detail, Narcissa's face grew paler and more furious. Healer Pie took careful notes, his expression growing darker with every revelation. And slowly, Harry began to understand that what he'd lived through wasn't normal at all. That children weren't supposed to be locked away and starved and beaten for things they couldn't control. The malnutrition is severe, Healer Pie told Narcissa quietly, though not so quietly that Harry couldn't hear. He's significantly underweight for his age, and his growth has been stunted. The bone damage from repeated breaks that weren't properly healed will require ongoing treatment. And the magical suppression, he shook his head. I've never seen anything like it. They've been trying to starve the magic out of him for years. Can you help him? Narcissa asked, and her voice shook slightly. Can you heal the damage? Most of it, yes. The malnutrition can be addressed with proper nutrition and some supplements. The bones can be mended, though he'll need to be careful while they're re-knitting. But the psychological trauma. Healer Pie looked at Harry with infinite compassion. That will take time and patience and a great deal of love. He'll have it, Narcissa said fiercely. All the time and patience and love he needs. Harry stared at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. You mean I can stay? You want me to stay? Oh, sweetheart. Narcissa reached for him, and this time Harry didn't hesitate before leaning into her embrace. Of course you can stay. We're going to take care of you now. We're going to make sure you're safe and fed and loved, exactly the way you should have been all along." Harry buried his face against her shoulder and finally let himself cry. Great, heaving sobs that shook his whole body. All the fear and loneliness and pain he'd carried for so long poured out of him, and Narcissa held him through all of it, murmuring soft words of comfort and stroking his hair with gentle fingers. "Who placed him with these people?" she asked Healer Pie over Harry's head, and her voice was glacial. "Who made the decision to put a magical child with relatives who would abuse him for his magic?" "According to the records," Healer Pie said carefully, "the placement was arranged by Albus Dumbledore. He claimed the boy would be safer with blood relatives." Safer. Narcissa's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more venom than Harry had ever heard in a human voice. "He called this safer." "Narcissa, no." She stood up, still holding Harry but with steel in every line of her body. "That man placed a 1-year-old child with people who tortured him for 7 years. He has questions to answer." Later, after Healer Pie had left, with promises to return with healing potions and nutritional supplements, after Harry had been given his first real bath in memory and dressed in soft pajamas that actually fit him, after Narcissa had tucked him into a bed that was larger and softer than anything he'd ever dreamed of, Harry lay in the darkness and tried to process everything that had happened. He was safe. He was fed. He was clean and warm, and lying in a real bed instead of the cupboard under the stairs. A kind woman with gentle hands had promised to take care of him, and for the first time in his life, Harry thought he might actually believe in promises. But even as sleep began to claim him, he couldn't shake the memory of Narcissa's voice when she'd spoken about the man who'd placed him with the Dursleys. There had been something in that voice that spoke of retribution, of a reckoning that was coming. Harry thought that this Dumbledore person, whoever he was, had better have some very good explanations ready. Chapter 4. Letters and Lies. Harry had been asleep for perhaps 2 hours when the wards around Malfoy Manor began to sing. It wasn't a sound that could be heard with ears, rather it was a thrumming in the air itself, a vibration that seemed to resonate in the bones of anyone with magical blood. In his borrowed bedroom, Harry stirred restlessly, some instinct warning him that something was wrong, even though he had no understanding of what the sensation meant. In the master bedroom down the hall, Narcissa sat bolt upright in bed, her hand immediately reaching for the wand on her nightstand. Beside her, Lucius was already moving, his own wand appearing in his hand with practiced ease. "The main gates," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. "Someone's requesting entry." At this hour, Narcissa was already reaching for her dressing gown, her maternal instincts immediately turning toward Harry's room. "Who would—" "Albus Dumbledore," Lucius said grimly, and there was something in his voice that made Narcissa freeze. "I can feel his magical signature on the wards. He's come for the boy." Narcissa's hands stilled on the silk ties of her robe. "So soon? Did you think he wouldn't notice when Potter disappeared from his carefully crafted prison?" Lucius's tone was sardonic, but there was steel underneath it. "The question is whether we're prepared for this confrontation." "Are you?" Narcissa asked quietly, studying her husband's face in the dim light filtering through the curtains. "Prepared to stand against Dumbledore? To refuse the great hero of the wizarding world?" Lucius was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that Narcissa had rarely heard from him. "I've seen what that man's idea of safety looks like, Narcissa. I've seen the healer's reports. Whatever Dumbledore's reputation, whatever debt the wizarding world thinks it owes him, it doesn't give him the right to condemn a child to 7 years of torture." The wards chimed again, more insistently this time, and Narcissa could hear the faint sound of Dobby's feet pattering across the marble floors below as he went to answer the door. "We should wake Harry," she said, though every maternal instinct in her rebelled at the idea of disturbing the boy's first peaceful sleep in years. "He should know what's happening." "No," Lucius said firmly. "Let him sleep as long as possible. This conversation may become unpleasant." But even as he spoke, they heard the soft sound of a door opening down the hall, followed by hesitant footsteps on the thick carpet. A moment later came a tentative knock on their bedroom door. "Mrs. Malfoy?" Harry's voice was small and uncertain. "Something woke me up. It felt like music, but not music. And I thought I heard voices." Narcissa was at the door in an instant, pulling it open to reveal Harry standing in the hallway in his borrowed pajamas, his dark hair rumpled with sleep, and his green eyes wide with confusion and nascent fear. "Oh, sweetheart," she said softly, kneeling down to his eye level. "I'm sorry we woke you. There's someone here to see us. Someone who wants to talk about your living arrangements." Harry's face went pale, and his hands began to shake. "They want to send me back," he whispered. And it wasn't a question. "Someone wants to send me back to Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia." "Over my dead body," Narcissa said fiercely, and the vehemence in her voice made Harry blink in surprise. "No one is sending you anywhere you don't want to go. Do you understand me? You're safe here." "But what if they make me?" Harry asked, and his voice broke on the words. "What if whoever it is has the right to make me go back?" "I can't, Mrs. Malfoy. I can't go back to the cupboard. I can't—" "Breathe," Narcissa commanded gently, taking Harry's hands in hers. "Listen to me, Harry. No one has the right to send you somewhere you'll be hurt. I don't care who they are or what authority they think they have. You are under my protection now, and I protect what's mine." The sound of voices drifted up from the entrance hall below, Dobby's nervous squeaking, and a deeper voice that carried the weight of authority and absolute certainty. "Perhaps," Lucius said from behind Narcissa, "it would be best if Harry stayed in his room while we handle this. There's no need for him to be subjected to whatever arguments Dumbledore intends to make." "No," Harry said suddenly, and there was a note in his voice that neither Malfoy had heard before. Not defiance exactly, but determination. "No, I want to be there. If someone's going to decide what happens to me, I want to hear what they're saying. I want to have a say." Narcissa and Lucius exchanged a glance over his head, and something passed between them. Surprise, perhaps, at this show of backbone from a child who had been conditioned to accept whatever adults decided for him. "Very well," Narcissa said finally. "But you stay between your father and me, and if things become too heated, you go to your room immediately. Agreed?" Harry nodded quickly, then paused. "My father?" "Lucius," Narcissa said softly. "I meant Lucius. We're going to take care of you now, Harry. Both of us." The warmth that flooded Harry's chest at those words was almost overwhelming. But before he could respond, the sound of footsteps on the marble stairs indicated that their visitor was being escorted up to meet them. Dobby appeared first, his large ears drooping with anxiety and his hands wringing the tea towel he carried. "Master," he squeaked to Lucius, "the great Albus Dumbledore is wanting to speak with you about Harry Potter. Dobby is telling him that Master is sleeping, but he is saying it cannot wait." "It's all right, Dobby," Lucius said calmly. "Show him to my study. We'll be down in a moment." "The great Albus Dumbledore?" Harry whispered as Dobby scurried away. "Who's that?" "The headmaster of Hogwarts School," Narcissa explained quietly as they made their way down the stairs. "A very powerful wizard, and one who is much beloved by the wizarding public. He's the one who placed you with your relatives." Harry's steps faltered. "He's the one who gave me to Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia?" "Yes," Lucius said grimly. "And now he's here to explain himself." The study had been transformed by the presence of the man standing before the fireplace. He was tall and thin, with long silver hair and a beard that reached nearly to his waist. His robes were midnight blue and covered with silver stars that seemed to twinkle in the firelight, and his blue eyes, magnified by half-moon spectacles, were fixed on the doorway with an intensity that made Harry instinctively step closer to Narcissa. "Ah," the man said, and his voice was warm and grandfatherly, with just a hint of disappointment. "Lucius, Narcissa, and young Harry, of course. I confess I had hoped to find you still safely at your relative's home, my boy." "Safely?" Narcissa's voice could have cut glass. "You call what we found safe?" Dumbledore's eyes flickered to her, and for just a moment Harry caught something in that gaze that didn't match the kindly grandfather act. Something calculating and cold. "I understand there may have been some difficulties with the Dursley family, but I assure you, Harry was placed there for very good reasons. The blood protection afforded by his mother's sacrifice is worthless if the child dies from neglect before he comes of age," Lucius interrupted smoothly. "Please, Headmaster, sit down. We have a great deal to discuss." But Dumbledore remained standing, his attention focused entirely on Harry. "My boy," he said gently, "I know this must all be very confusing for you. These people have filled your head with stories about mistreatment, but you must understand that your aunt and uncle love you in their own way. They were simply unprepared for the challenges of raising a magical child. They locked me in a cupboard," Harry said quietly, and his voice was steady despite the fear coursing through him. "They didn't feed me for days at a time. Uncle Vernon hit me with his belt when I made things happen that I couldn't control. They told me I was a freak and that my parents died because they were worthless drunks." Something flickered across Dumbledore's face. Pain, perhaps, or regret, but his voice remained gentle. "I'm sorry you experienced that, Harry. Truly. But the protection your mother's blood provides—" "What protection?" Narcissa stepped forward, her blue eyes blazing. "What protection kept him from being systematically starved and beaten? What protection prevented him from being locked away like an animal? We have healers' reports, Dumbledore, documentation of 7 years of abuse. Where exactly was this miraculous protection you keep speaking of?" "The protection works to keep him safe from magical threats," Dumbledore explained patiently, though Harry noticed that his knuckles were white where he gripped his wand. "Voldemort's followers, dark wizards who might wish to use or harm him for what he represents. The discomfort he may have experienced." "Discomfort?" Lucius's voice was deadly quiet. "Is that what you call it? Broken bones that were left to heal crookedly? Malnutrition so severe that his growth was stunted? A child's spirit nearly crushed by years of systematic cruelty?" "And for what?" Narcissa added, her voice rising. "To protect him from followers of a wizard who's been dead for 7 years. To guard against threats that may never come, while guaranteeing that he suffers actual, documented harm every single day." Dumbledore's face had gone very still. "Tom is not dead," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made the room suddenly feel colder. "Diminished, yes. Incorporeal, but not dead. And his followers are very much alive, and very much interested in revenge." "Then provide him with proper magical protection," Lucius said sharply. "Ward a safe house. Place him with a magical family who can defend him and care for him properly. Don't condemn an innocent child to a decade of torture for the sake of blood magic that clearly isn't working as intended. The blood protection is the strongest." "The blood protection," interrupted a new voice from the corner of the room, "is being worthless if Harry Potter is being dead from starvation." Everyone turned to look at Dobby, who had apparently been standing unnoticed in the shadows. The house elf was trembling, but his large eyes were fixed on Dumbledore with something that might have been accusation. "Dobby has been watching," the elf continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Dobby has been seeing Harry Potter locked away, hearing him crying in the dark, watching him grow thinner and sadder with each passing year. If this is being protection, sir, then protection is being a very cruel thing." "You observed the boy's treatment?" Dumbledore asked sharply, his grandfatherly manner slipping for just a moment. For how long? Since Harry Potter was being small, Dobby said simply. Dobby is visiting the Dursley house sometimes, when magical disturbances is being reported. Dobby is seeing the bars on the window, the locks on the cupboard door, the way they is treating him like he is being nothing. Dobby is telling himself that surely the great Albus Dumbledore is knowing what is best. But the elf's voice broke slightly. But sometimes, sir, even house elves is knowing when something is being wrong. The silence that followed was deafening. Dumbledore's face had gone very pale, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. You're saying you have a witness to the boy's treatment? We're saying we have evidence, Lucius said coldly. Healer testimony, magical documentation, and yes, witness accounts. All of which will be very difficult to explain should it become public knowledge that the great Albus Dumbledore knowingly placed the boy who lived in an abusive home and left him there for 7 years. You wouldn't dare, wouldn't I? Lucius's smile was sharp as a blade. Try me, headmaster. Try to take this child from a home where he's fed and cared for and protected, and see how quickly the prophet receives a very detailed accounting of your placement decisions. See how your reputation weathers the revelation that you condemned a hero's child to a cupboard under the stairs. Dumbledore looked between them, and Harry could see the calculations running behind those blue eyes. What do you want? Custody, Narcissa said immediately. Legal, binding custody. Harry stays here, with us, where he'll be loved and protected, and treated the way a child should be treated. And in return? In return, Lucius said silkily, your reputation remains intact. The wizarding world continues to revere you as the hero who saved us all from Grindelwald. No one needs to know that you spent 7 years turning a blind eye to the abuse of an innocent child. Harry watched the interplay between the adults with fascination and growing hope. He didn't understand all the political undercurrents, but he understood that these people, Narcissa and Lucius and even Dobby, were fighting for him. Fighting to keep him safe, to let him stay in this beautiful house with people who called him sweetheart and made sure he had enough to eat. I need time to consider, Dumbledore said finally, and his voice sounded older than it had when he'd first arrived. You have until tomorrow evening, Lucius said calmly. After that, we'll assume you've chosen to make this a public matter. Dumbledore nodded stiffly and moved toward the door, but Harry's voice stopped him. Sir? Harry's voice was small but clear. Why did you put me there? If you knew they didn't want me, if you knew they thought magic was freakish, why did you leave me with them? Dumbledore turned back, and for a moment his face was unguarded, showing something that looked almost like grief. Because I thought it was for the greater good, Harry. I thought the protection was worth any temporary discomfort you might experience. Temporary? Harry's voice cracked slightly. I've lived there for 7 years. That's most of my life. How long did you expect me to endure? Temporary discomfort. Dumbledore didn't answer. Instead, he inclined his head to the Malfoys and walked out into the night, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy with unspoken possibilities. Is it over? Harry asked quietly. Can I really stay? Narcissa knelt down and pulled him into her arms, holding him close against her chest. Yes, sweetheart, she whispered into his hair. You can stay. You're home now. And for the first time in his 8 years of life, Harry Potter believed that someone actually meant it when they said the word home. Chapter 5. The Boy Who Lived to Play. Harry woke to sunlight streaming through tall windows, and for a moment he couldn't remember where he was. The bed beneath him was soft beyond anything he'd ever experienced, the sheets smooth and clean-smelling, and when he turned his head, he could see a room that belonged in a fairy tale. It was his room. The thought still felt impossible, even after Narcissa had shown it to him the night before. His room, with its high ceiling painted a soft blue, like a summer sky, its tall windows that looked out over gardens that seemed to stretch forever. His room, with actual furniture, a wardrobe carved with flowers and vines, a desk with a chair that was exactly the right size, bookshelves that were currently empty but waiting to be filled. Harry sat up slowly, half convinced that if he moved too quickly, it would all disappear and he'd find himself back in the cupboard under the stairs. But the room remained solid around him, real and beautiful, and his. A soft knock on the door made him freeze. "Harry?" Narcissa's voice was gentle through the heavy wood. "Are you awake, sweetheart? I have some things for you." "Yes, Mum," Harry called back, his voice still hoarse from sleep. "May I come in?" The fact that she asked permission to enter what was supposedly his room made something warm unfurl in Harry's chest. "Yes, please." Narcissa entered, carrying what looked like an armload of clothing, her face bright with the kind of excitement Harry had only ever seen on Aunt Petunia's face when she was shopping for Dudley. But this excitement was for him, and the novelty of that was almost overwhelming. "I sent one of the house elves to Diagon Alley early this morning," she explained, setting the clothes down on the bed beside him. "I estimated your size based on Draco's measurements from when he was a bit smaller. These should fit you properly until we can take you shopping for yourself." Harry stared at the clothes with something approaching awe. Everything was new, still crisp from the shop, and clearly made for someone his size, rather than inherited from a cousin twice his weight. There were trousers that looked like they would actually stay up without a belt, shirts in soft colors he'd never been allowed to wear, and a jumper so soft it made his fingers tingle when he touched it. "Are these really for me?" he whispered, and Narcissa's expression softened even further. "Of course they're for you. Every child deserves clothes that fit properly." She paused, then sat down on the edge of the bed. "Harry, has no one ever bought you new clothes before?" Harry shook his head, not trusting his voice. How could he explain that the Dursleys had always acted as though spending money on him was an unnecessary extravagance? That his entire wardrobe had consisted of Dudley's cast-offs, handed down only when they became too small, even for his considerable bulk? "Well," Narcissa said briskly, though Harry caught the flash of anger in her eyes, "that changes now. Would you like to get dressed and come down for breakfast? I thought perhaps Draco could show you around the grounds afterward." The prospect of exploring the beautiful gardens he'd glimpsed from his window was almost as appealing as the idea of breakfast. Real breakfast, not the single piece of dry toast he'd been used to when the Dursleys remembered to feed him at all. 20 minutes later, Harry made his way down the grand staircase, wearing clothes that actually fit him. The sensation was so novel that he kept looking down at himself in wonder. The trousers stayed up without him having to constantly hitch them. The shirt didn't hang off him like a tent. The jumper was warm without being suffocating. He found the breakfast room by following the sound of voices and the smell of something that made his stomach growl with anticipation. The room was smaller than the dining room he'd glimpsed the night before, but it was still grander than anything he'd ever seen. Tall windows looked out over a rose garden, and a crystal chandelier cast rainbows across the polished table where Narcissa and Draco were already seated. "There you are," Narcissa smiled, rising to guide him to a chair beside Draco. "How did you sleep?" "Very well, thank you," Harry said, the polite phrases feeling strange on his tongue. The Dursleys had never asked about his sleep, had never cared whether he was comfortable or rested. "The clothes look perfect," Narcissa continued, settling back into her chair. "Draco, doesn't Harry look much better in clothes that actually fit him?" Draco, who had been cutting his eggs with the kind of precise movements that spoke of years of etiquette lessons, looked up with genuine interest. "Much better," he agreed seriously. "Those other clothes made you look like you were playing dress-up in someone else's wardrobe." Harry felt heat rise in his cheeks, but there was no mockery in Draco's tone, just matter-of-fact observation, the way he might comment on the weather. "I never had clothes that were actually mine before," Harry admitted quietly, and saw Draco's grey eyes widen slightly. "Never." Draco set down his fork completely, giving Harry his full attention. "But what did you wear?" "Hand-me-downs from my cousin. He's—" Harry gestured vaguely, trying to indicate Dudley's considerable size without being unkind. "Much larger than you," Draco finished, and his voice carried a note of indignation that surprised Harry. "That's awful. Everyone should have their own clothes." The casual outrage in Draco's voice, as though the idea of Harry being denied proper clothing was personally offensive to him, made something tight in Harry's chest loosen a little more. Breakfast was a revelation. There were eggs prepared 3 different ways, toast with real butter and jam, fresh fruit that tasted like sunshine, and juice that was so cold and sweet Harry had to concentrate on sipping it slowly, instead of gulping it down like a man dying of thirst. Narcissa watched him eat with the same careful attention she'd shown the night before, occasionally offering him something new to try or making sure his glass stayed full. "When you're finished," she said, as Harry worked his way through what felt like the best meal of his life, "perhaps Draco could show you the grounds. I think you'd enjoy seeing the peacocks." "Peacocks?" Harry's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Father keeps them as a status symbol," Draco explained, with the kind of casual sophistication that reminded Harry they came from completely different worlds. "They're beautiful but rather vain. Rather like Father, actually." "Draco," Narcissa said, but her tone was more amused than scolding. "It's true, Mother. You know it's true." The easy banter between mother and son was something Harry had never witnessed before. In his experience, children who talked back to adults were punished, not gently teased in return. The warmth between them was something he wanted to wrap around himself like a blanket. "Would you like to see them?" Draco asked, turning back to Harry. "The peacocks, I mean. And I could show you the maze, and the lake. There are boats we could take out, if you know how to swim." "I don't," Harry admitted. "I never learned." "That's all right. We don't have to go on the water. There's plenty to see on land." Draco's acceptance of his limitations was so casual, so free of judgment, that Harry felt tears prick at his eyes for reasons he couldn't quite name. An hour later, they were walking across the vast lawn behind the manor, Draco chattering easily about the history of the house and the grounds, while Harry listened in fascination. Everything was so beautiful it almost hurt to look at. The carefully tended gardens, the ornamental trees, the lake that sparkled in the distance like scattered diamonds. "That's the maze," Draco said, pointing to what looked like a small forest of perfectly trimmed hedges. "It's quite old. Father says it was planted by one of our ancestors 3 centuries ago. Would you like to try it?" Harry nodded eagerly, and they spent the next hour getting thoroughly lost among the high green walls. But instead of being frustrating, it was wonderful in a way Harry had never experienced. Every wrong turn was an adventure, every dead end an opportunity to double back and try again. And when they finally stumbled out at the center, where a small fountain played in a circle of sunlight, Harry realized he was laughing, actually laughing. When was the last time he'd laughed? "You're quite good at this," Draco said admiringly, as they collapsed onto the stone bench beside the fountain. "I usually get hopelessly turned around, but you seemed to know exactly where we were going." "I didn't," Harry protested. "I was as lost as you were." "But you weren't scared," Draco observed. "Most people get frightened when they can't find their way. You just kept exploring like it was a game." Harry considered this. I suppose being lost in a beautiful place is different from being locked in a small one." Something flickered across Draco's face. Understanding, perhaps, or sympathy. "You were locked up a lot, weren't you? At your relative's house?" Harry nodded, not trusting his voice. "That's barbaric," Draco said with quiet fury. "Children aren't meant to be locked away like prisoners. Children are meant to play and explore and be children." "I never really got to be a child," Harry said softly. "I always had to be careful not to upset Uncle Vernon, not to do anything freakish, not to ask for things I wasn't going to get anyway. Well, you can be a child now, Draco said firmly. You can explore and play and ask for whatever you want. And if anyone tries to lock you up again, I'll— He paused, his young face fierce with protective anger. Well, I'll do something. Something appropriately terrible. The fierce loyalty in Draco's voice, coming from a boy he'd known for less than a day, was almost more than Harry could process. He felt something building in his chest, gratitude and relief, and a kind of overwhelming emotion he didn't have words for. The fountain beside them suddenly erupted. Water shot 20 feet into the air, sparkling in the afternoon sun as it rained down on both boys. Harry scrambled backward with a yelp of surprise, but instead of being angry about getting soaked, Draco began to laugh. "Brilliant," he said, pushing his dripping hair out of his eyes. "Was that you?" "That was you, wasn't it?" "I'm sorry," Harry said quickly, the automatic apology spilling out before he could stop it. "I didn't mean to. I can't control it. I'm sorry." "Why are you apologizing?" Draco asked, looking genuinely puzzled. "That was amazing. I can barely light a candle with my magic, and you just made the fountain explode. Do you know how powerful you'd have to be to do that?" "Powerful?" Harry stared at him. "But it's freakish. Aunt Petunia always said—" "Your aunt was an idiot," Draco said bluntly. "Magic isn't freakish, Harry. It's wonderful, and you're brilliant at it." The casual dismissal of 7 years of conditioning, the matter-of-fact declaration that his magic was something to be proud of rather than ashamed of, hit Harry like a physical blow. He felt his eyes fill with tears again, but this time they were tears of relief rather than pain. "Harry," Draco's voice had gone soft with concern. "Are you all right?" Harry wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. "No one ever said my magic was wonderful before. Everyone always acted like it was something terrible." "Well, everyone was wrong," Draco said firmly. "Your magic is part of you, and you're—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "You're the first person who's ever wanted to be my friend just because. Not because of my family or our money, or because their parents told them to be nice to me. You like me, even though you don't know anything about any of that." "You like me even though I'm nobody," Harry replied quietly. "Even though I don't know anything about being a wizard or having a proper family." "You're not nobody," Draco said with the kind of certainty that only 8-year-olds could manage. "You're Harry Potter. But more than that, you're Harry. My friend Harry, who's brave enough to explore mazes, and powerful enough to make fountains explode, and kind enough to worry about apologizing for getting me wet when I think it's the most fun I've had in months." They sat there in companionable silence as the fountain gradually returned to its normal, gentle flow, and their clothes began to dry in the warm afternoon sun. Harry felt something he'd never experienced before, the simple, uncomplicated pleasure of friendship. Not the wary alliance he'd sometimes managed with other children who were also afraid of Dudley, but genuine connection with someone who seemed to understand him instinctively. "Master Draco," the voice came from the direction of the manor, high and anxious. "Master Draco, where is you being?" A house elf appeared around the corner of the maze, wringing her hands with worry. When she caught sight of the 2 boys, her large eyes went even wider. "Oh, Master Draco is being safe. Mistress is wanting you both for tea, and when Tippy could not find you, Tippy was thinking—" The elf stopped abruptly as her gaze fell on Harry, and her expression shifted to something that might have been fear. Harry tensed automatically, recognizing the look. It was the same way Mrs. Figg looked at him sometimes, when she forgot that he was supposed to be just Petunia's nephew, and not the strange boy who made impossible things happen. "You is being Harry Potter," Tippy whispered, and her voice carried a reverence that made Harry deeply uncomfortable. "The boy who lived. Oh, Tippy is not worthy to speak to—" "Stop!" Draco's voice cut across the elf's words with sharp authority that reminded Harry suddenly of Lucius. "Harry is a guest in this house, and guests are to be treated with respect, not fear. He's not some legendary figure for you to grovel before. He's a boy, just like me." Tippy's ears drooped, but she nodded quickly. "Yes, Master Draco. Tippy is understanding. Tippy will treat young Master Harry with proper respect." "Good." Draco stood and held out his hand to Harry. "Come on. If Mother's calling us for tea, we'd better go. She gets rather particular about punctuality." As they followed Tippy back toward the manor, Harry marveled at how casually Draco had defended him. Not because Harry was famous or important, but simply because Draco considered him a friend worth protecting. It was the second time that day someone had stood up for him without expecting anything in return, and Harry was beginning to think that this was what family felt like. That evening, after a dinner that was somehow even better than breakfast, Narcissa showed Harry something called a bedtime routine. She helped him wash and brush his teeth with a toothbrush that was brand new, and his alone. She tucked him into bed with sheets that smelled of lavender and sunshine. And then, most magical of all, she sat on the edge of his bed and read him a story. Not a lesson disguised as a story, not a moral tale designed to teach him proper behavior, but a simple, wonderful adventure about brave children and magical creatures and happy endings. Her voice was soft and melodic, and when she reached the end, she leaned down to press a gentle kiss to his forehead. "Sleep well, sweetheart," she whispered. "Tomorrow we'll continue teaching you about our world." "Mrs. Malfoy?" Harry's voice was small in the darkness. "Thank you. For everything. For letting me stay and giving me clothes and food and for making me feel like I matter. Oh, my darling boy." Narcissa's voice was thick with emotion. "You matter more than you could possibly know. Sleep now. You're safe, and you're loved, and tomorrow will bring new adventures." As she closed the door softly behind her, Harry lay in his wonderful bed in his beautiful room and tried to process everything that had happened. 2 days ago, he'd been Harry Dursley's worthless nephew, locked in a cupboard and counting the hours until his next meal. Now he was Harry Potter Malfoy. The name felt strange but right, with a friend who thought his magic was brilliant and a mother who called him sweetheart and read him stories. For the first time in his life, Harry fell asleep, not to the sound of Uncle Vernon's snores through the thin cupboard door, but to the gentle whisper of wind through the gardens of his new home. Chapter 6. Severus and Secrets. The arrival was announced not by house elves or formal introduction, but by the sudden stiffening of every magical person in Malfoy Manor. It was a presence that set teeth on edge, cold, sharp, and carrying with it the weight of barely contained power and decades of carefully nursed grievances. Harry felt it first as a prickling sensation between his shoulder blades as he sat in the morning room with Draco, carefully practicing the proper way to hold a quill. 3 days at the manor had already begun to change him. His face had filled out slightly from regular meals, his posture had straightened from sleeping in a real bed, and his eyes had lost some of the wariness that had marked him since infancy. "Someone's coming," he said quietly, setting down his quill and looking toward the tall windows that faced the front drive. Draco followed his gaze, though there was nothing visible yet on the long approach to the house. "How can you tell?" "I don't know. It feels like—" Harry struggled to find words for the sensation. "Like storm clouds, but inside my head." "That," said Narcissa from the doorway, her voice carefully controlled, "would be Severus Snape. And the fact that you can sense his approach from this distance suggests your magical sensitivity is even more pronounced than we suspected." She moved into the room with the kind of fluid grace that spoke of years of training in proper deportment. But Harry caught the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers drummed once against her skirts before she stilled them. "Who's Severus Snape?" Harry asked, though something about the name made his stomach clench with unease. "An old acquaintance," Narcissa said carefully. "He teaches at Hogwarts. That's the school you'll attend when you're 11. He's also—" She paused, seeming to weigh her words. He knew your parents. Harry's quill clattered to the floor. In the 3 days since arriving at the manor, he'd learned more about the magical world than he'd ever imagined possible, but no one had yet been able to tell him anything substantive about his mother and father, beyond the bare facts of their deaths. He knew them? Harry's voice came out smaller than he intended. He knew my mother and father. Yes, sweetheart. They attended Hogwarts together. Narcissa's expression softened as she took in Harry's hungry expression. Perhaps you'll finally get some answers to your questions. The sound of the front door opening and closing echoed through the manor, followed by the distinctive click of boot heels on marble. Narcissa straightened, and when she spoke, her voice carried the kind of authority that reminded Harry she was the mistress of this house, regardless of who might be calling. Draco, why don't you continue your writing practice? Harry, would you like to come with me to meet Professor Snape? Harry nodded quickly, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. Someone who had known his parents, really known them, not just heard stories or read about them in books. Someone who might be able to tell him what they were actually like, whether they would have been proud of him, whether he had his father's eyes or his mother's smile, or his own unique combination of traits that marked him as their child. They found Lucius in the entrance hall, standing opposite a man who seemed to embody every childhood nightmare about stern schoolmasters. He was tall and thin to the point of gauntness, with long black hair that hung in lank curtains around a sallow face. His nose was prominent and sharp, his mouth turned down in a permanent expression of disdain, and his black eyes were chips of obsidian that seemed to miss nothing. When those eyes fell on Harry, they widened slightly, the first crack in an otherwise impenetrable facade. "Potter," the man said, and his voice was like silk wrapped around steel. "You look—" He paused, and Harry saw something flicker across his features. "Different than I expected." "This is Professor Snape, Harry," Narcissa said smoothly, placing a protective hand on Harry's shoulder. "Severus, may I present Harry Potter, our ward?" "Ward?" Snape's eyebrows rose. "How? Official?" "Quite," Lucius said coolly. "The paperwork should be finalized within the week, assuming, of course, that certain interested parties don't attempt to interfere." Snape's gaze moved between the adults, and Harry caught the subtle communication passing between them, warnings and challenges and agreements that he wasn't quite old enough to understand. But when Snape's attention returned to him, Harry found himself straightening under that penetrating stare. "You knew my parents," Harry said, and it wasn't a question. "Mrs. Malfoy said you went to school with them." Something shuttered behind Snape's dark eyes. "I did." "What were they like?" The words tumbled out before Harry could stop them. 8 years of desperate curiosity, finally finding an outlet. "I mean, I know they died when I was little, but no one's ever told me anything about them. What did they look like? What were their favorite subjects? Did they like to read? Were they funny? Did they—" "Slow down, sweetheart," Narcissa murmured, her hand tightening protectively on his shoulder. But her voice was gentle, not scolding. Snape was staring at Harry as though he'd never seen a child before. You don't know anything about them." "Just that they died in a car crash when I was one," Harry said quietly. "My aunt and uncle said they were worthless drunks who got themselves killed and left me for other people to deal with." The change that came over Snape's face was immediate and alarming. His already pale skin went white, his nostrils flared, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "A car crash," he repeated, his voice deadly quiet. "That's what the Dursleys told him," Narcissa said, her own voice sharp with anger, among other lies designed to make him feel ashamed of his heritage. "Your parents," Snape said to Harry, ignoring the adults entirely, "did not die in a car crash. They were murdered by a dark wizard named Voldemort, and they died protecting you. Your father was brave and your mother was brilliant, and neither of them touched alcohol except for the occasional glass of wine with dinner." Harry felt the world tilt around him. "Murdered? But why would anyone want to murder my parents? Snape glanced at Narcissa, who nodded slightly. Because of a prophecy, he said carefully. A prediction that said a child born at the end of July would have the power to defeat the Dark Lord. Voldemort chose to interpret that as referring to you. But I was just a baby, Harry protested. How could a baby defeat anyone? No one knows, Snape admitted. But when Voldemort tried to kill you, something went wrong. He was destroyed instead, and you survived with nothing but a scar. Automatically, Harry's hand went to his forehead, to the lightning bolt-shaped mark he'd always assumed was from some childhood accident. This scar? That scar, Snape confirmed. It's the mark of the killing curse, a curse that has never failed to kill before you. Harry stared at him, trying to process this information. His parents hadn't been worthless drunks who died because they were careless. They'd been murdered trying to protect him. And somehow, impossibly, he'd survived something that should have killed him. Were you there? He asked quietly. When they died? No. Snape's voice was rough. I arrived too late to help them. Something in his tone suggested there was more to that story. But before Harry could ask, Snape was speaking again. Your mother had green eyes, he said suddenly. Exactly like yours. She was brilliant at potions and charms, and she had a temper that could strip paint when someone threatened the people she cared about. She would hex anyone who bullied younger students, and she once turned Sirius Black's hair pink for a month because he made a first-year cry. And my father? Harry asked breathlessly. Snape's expression tightened. Your father was popular, good at Quidditch, a flying sport. He had hair that stuck up just like yours does, and he was brave to the point of recklessness. He would have died for his friends without hesitation, and in the end, he died for his family. It wasn't the most glowing description Harry had ever heard, but it was honest in a way that the Dursleys' lies had never been. And more importantly, it was real. These were his parents, flawed and human, and nothing like the monsters his aunt and uncle had painted them as. Do I look like them? Harry asked, and there was something almost desperate in his voice. You have your mother's eyes, Snape said quietly. But otherwise, you look remarkably like your father did at your age. Is that bad? Harry asked, catching something in Snape's tone. It's complicated, Snape said after a long pause. Your father and I did not get along well at school. Why not? Snape looked like he was struggling with how much to reveal to an 8-year-old. He thought I was strange and unpleasant. I thought he was an arrogant bully. We were both probably right. But you were friends with my mother? Yes. The word was so quiet, Harry almost missed it. Yes, I was friends with your mother. She was the kindest person I knew. The pain in Snape's voice was so raw, so unguarded, that Harry felt tears prick at his eyes. Without thinking, he stepped forward and took Snape's hand in both of his own. I'm sorry, he said softly. I'm sorry you lost your friend. I'm sorry I never got to know her. Snape stared down at their joined hands as though he'd never seen anything like it before. You're not what I expected, he said finally. What did you expect? Harry asked, genuinely curious. Someone more like your father, Snape admitted. Arrogant, entitled, convinced of your own importance because of what happened when you were a baby. But I didn't know what happened when I was a baby until just now, Harry pointed out reasonably. And even if I had known, I don't see why surviving something should make me feel important. I was just lucky, wasn't I? Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Snape's mouth. Just lucky, he repeated. Yes, I suppose you could look at it that way. Severus, Narcissa said quietly. Might I speak with you privately? Snape nodded, and they moved to the far end of the entrance hall, speaking in low tones that Harry couldn't quite make out, but he caught fragments. better off here, and Dumbledore's expectations, and the boys' welfare. When they returned, Snape's expression was thoughtful, almost calculating. "Potter," he said to Harry, "how are you finding life at Malfoy Manor?" "It's wonderful," Harry said honestly. "Mrs. Malfoy reads me stories at bedtime, and Mr. Malfoy is teaching me about magical lore, and Draco is the best friend I've ever had. They feed me whenever I'm hungry, and they gave me my own room, and they don't lock me up when I do magic by accident." "They don't lock you up when you do magic," Snape repeated slowly. "No. Draco says magic is brilliant, and Mrs. Malfoy says it's as natural as breathing. Is that true?" "Yes," Snape said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle. "That's true. Magic is a gift, not a curse. That's what they told me too." Harry smiled up at him. "I'm still learning about it. There's so much I don't understand. But everyone here is very patient with me." Snape looked at him for a long moment, then at Narcissa, then back at Harry. "I can see that," he said finally. "You seem well cared for." "I am," Harry said firmly. "Mrs. Malfoy says I'm safe now, and I believe her." "Good," Snape said, and there was something in his voice that Harry couldn't identify. "That's good." Later, after Snape had declined dinner and taken his leave, Narcissa found Harry sitting in the library, staring out the window at the gathering dusk. "Deep in thought?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Professor Snape really loved my mother, didn't he?" Harry said quietly. "Not like married love, but friend love. Deep friend love." Narcissa was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said finally. "I think he did. It made him sad to look at me," Harry continued, "because I have her eyes, but I look like my father, and he didn't like my father very much." "That must have been confusing for him," Narcissa agreed carefully. "But I think maybe by the end he didn't mind so much. Looking at me, I mean." Harry turned to face her. "Do you think he'll come visit again?" "I don't know, sweetheart. Would you like him to?" Harry considered this. "Yes. He's sad and angry, and he doesn't smile very much. But he knew my parents. He can tell me things about them that no one else can. And I think maybe he needs to know that I'm not like the father he remembers. I think maybe that would help him feel less sad." Narcissa reached over and smoothed his hair, her touch infinitely gentle. "You have a very kind heart, Harry Potter," she said softly. "Your mother would be proud of the boy you're becoming." "Do you really think so?" "I know so. And I think Professor Snape knows it too, even if he doesn't quite know what to do with that knowledge yet." That night, as Narcissa tucked him into bed and read him a story about brave knights and noble quests, Harry found himself thinking about the complicated man with the dark eyes and the sad voice. Somewhere in the castle where Professor Snape lived and worked, he was probably thinking about a red-haired girl who had been kind to him when no one else was. And maybe, just maybe, he was also thinking about a dark-haired boy with green eyes who had held his hand and said he was sorry for his loss, not because he'd been told to, but because he meant it. Harry thought that might be a start. Chapter 7. The Garden and the Greenhouse. The greenhouse was a cathedral of glass and green, soaring toward the sky in elegant arches that caught the morning light and scattered it in prismatic rainbows across the flagstone paths. Harry had glimpsed it from his bedroom window each morning, but standing inside it for the first time was like stepping into another world entirely. The air was warm and humid, heavy with the scent of earth and growing things and something indefinably magical that made his fingertips tingle. Everywhere he looked, plants grew in impossible profusion, some that seemed normal except for their unusual size, others that glowed with their own inner light, and a few that moved in ways that had nothing to do with any breeze. "It's beautiful," he breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Narcissa, who had been watching his face with the kind of maternal satisfaction that came from seeing a child's wonder, smiled warmly. "I'm so glad you think so. I've always found that plants are the most honest of magical creatures. They respond to your intent, your emotion, your care, or the lack of it, without pretense or guile." It had been nearly a week since Harry's arrival at Malfoy Manor, and while the nightmares had begun to fade and his appetite had improved dramatically, Narcissa had noticed that he still startled at sudden movements and apologized reflexively for things that required no apology. This morning, when she'd suggested they spend some time in the greenhouse, she'd seen a spark of genuine curiosity light in his green eyes for the first time since the conversation with Professor Snape. "May I touch them?" Harry asked, his hands hovering uncertainly near a plant whose silver leaves seemed to shimmer like water. "Of course, sweetheart, but slowly and gently. Plants can sense your intentions, and if you approach them with respect, they'll respond in kind." Narcissa moved to stand beside him, her own hands demonstrating the light touch he should use. "This is Moonbell. See how it responds to your presence?" As Harry's fingers brushed the silver leaves, they chimed softly, a sound like distant bells carried on a summer breeze. His eyes widened in delight, and the plant seemed to sense his wonder, its chimes growing sweeter and more complex. "It likes me," Harry said with amazement. "It trusts you," Narcissa corrected gently. "Plants are excellent judges of character, Harry. They can sense the difference between someone who means them harm and someone who approaches them with genuine interest and kindness." They moved deeper into the greenhouse, Narcissa pointing out different species and explaining their properties, while Harry absorbed every word with the kind of intensity he'd never been allowed to show about anything at the Dursleys. Here was venomous tentacula, which would bite if threatened but produced healing sap when treated with respect. There were screaming mandrakes in soundproof containers, their leaves already showing the distinctive shape that would eventually develop into human-like faces. And in one corner, thriving in carefully maintained shadow, grew a cluster of something Narcissa called Devil's Snare. "The key to working with magical plants," Narcissa explained, as they paused beside a particularly exotic specimen with flowers that seemed to be made of living flame, "is understanding that they're not just tools to be used, but living beings with their own needs and preferences. They respond to your magical energy, but also to your emotional state." "Like when I made the fountain explode?" Harry asked, remembering his conversation with Draco in the maze. "Exactly. But that was uncontrolled magic, driven by overwhelming emotion. With plants, you can learn to channel your magic more deliberately." Narcissa knelt down, beside a tray of seedlings, their pale green shoots barely visible above the dark soil. "Would you like to try?" Harry nodded eagerly, settling cross-legged on the warm flagstones beside her. "What do I do?" "Just place your hands over the seedlings. Don't touch them. Just let your hands hover a few inches above. Close your eyes and think about growing. Think about warmth and water and light, about the satisfaction of stretching toward the sun." Harry followed her instructions, closing his eyes and trying to imagine what it would feel like to be a tiny plant pushing up through the earth. He thought about the warmth of the greenhouse, about the gentle light filtering through the glass ceiling, about the rich smell of the soil. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, gradually, Harry became aware of a tingling in his palms, a warm sensation that seemed to flow down from his hands into the plants below. When Narcissa's soft gasp made him open his eyes, the seedlings had grown visibly, their pale shoots now strong and green, their first true leaves unfurling toward his hands. "Oh my," Narcissa whispered. "Harry, that was extraordinary. I've never seen anyone with such a natural aptitude for plant magic." Harry stared at the seedlings, hardly daring to believe he had actually made them grow. "I did that? Really? You did that, all by yourself, without any formal training." Narcissa's voice was warm with pride. "Your magic responded to your intent and your emotion. You wanted to help them grow, and they could feel that desire. It didn't hurt? Harry asked, still staring at the plants. I mean, when my magic happens by accident, it's usually because I'm upset or angry. But this felt peaceful. Magic should feel peaceful when it's controlled and directed properly, Narcissa explained, settling more comfortably on the flagstones beside him. The wild magic you experienced with your relatives was your power trying to protect you from harm. But when you're safe and calm, magic can be gentle and precise. They spent the next hour moving through the greenhouse, with Harry trying his hand at different plants under Narcissa's careful guidance. He discovered he had an intuitive understanding of what each plant needed. More light for the sun-loving varieties, careful watering for the moisture-sensitive ones, gentle encouragement for the shy species that withdrew into themselves at the first sign of impatience. You have your mother's touch with growing things, Narcissa said, as they paused beside a climbing rose whose magical blooms changed color in response to the viewer's mood. Lily Evans was renowned for her skill in herbology. Professor Sprout used to say she could make anything grow. Harry looked up at her, his hand still gently stroking one of the rose's leaves. Professor Snape told me she was brilliant at potions and charms, too. Was there anything she wasn't good at? Well, Narcissa said with a slight smile, she was absolutely hopeless at divination. Couldn't read tea leaves to save her life, and her crystal ball consistently showed her nothing but her own reflection. She used to joke that the only thing she could predict with certainty was that Professor Trelawney's predictions would be completely wrong. Harry laughed, the sound bright and clear in the warm air of the greenhouse. That sounds like something Draco would say about a teacher he didn't like. Speaking of Draco, Narcissa said carefully, how are you finding it, having a brother? The question caught Harry off guard. Brother? Well, perhaps that's premature, Narcissa amended quickly. But you and Draco have grown quite close in the past week. I was wondering how you felt about sharing our attention with him. Harry was quiet for a long moment, his fingers still absently stroking the rose's leaves. I've never had to share before, he said finally. The Dursleys never paid attention to me unless I was in trouble, so there was nothing to share. And Dudley never wanted to share anything with me, his toys, his food, his parents' love. He just wanted to make sure I knew I could never have any of those things. Narcissa felt her heart clench at the casual way Harry spoke of his emotional starvation, as though it were a simple fact of life rather than a devastating form of abuse. But Draco's different, Harry continued, his voice growing stronger. When he shows me his favorite places or teaches me about magical games, he's not trying to keep things from me. He's trying to include me. And when you read to us both at bedtime, or when Mr. Malfoy teaches us both about magical lore, it doesn't feel like I'm taking anything away from Draco. It feels like there's enough love to go around. There is, Narcissa said softly, reaching out to brush a stray curl from his forehead. Love isn't finite, Harry. The more you give, the more you have. Loving you doesn't make me love Draco any less. It just makes my heart bigger. Is that why you wanted me to stay? Harry asked, his green eyes searching her face. Not because you felt sorry for me, but because you actually wanted me here. Oh, my darling boy, Narcissa said, her voice thick with emotion. I wanted you here the moment I saw you. Not because of who you're supposed to be, not because of what you survived as a baby, but because you were a child who needed love, and I had love to give. From that very first night, when you were so thin and frightened and brave, I knew you belonged with us. Harry's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears, tears of relief and gratitude rather than pain. I love you too, he whispered. Is it all right to say that, even though I haven't known you very long? It's more than all right, Narcissa assured him, pulling him into a gentle hug that smelled of roses and magic. It's perfect. They were still embracing when the greenhouse door opened, and Draco appeared, his cheeks flushed from running. "Mother, you have to come see." "Oh." He stopped short, taking in the scene before him, and Harry saw something flicker across his face. For a moment, Harry was terrified that Draco was angry, that he'd somehow overstepped by monopolizing Narcissa's attention. But then Draco's expression shifted, and what Harry saw there wasn't anger, but something more complex, a moment of uncertainty, perhaps even jealousy, followed by what looked like determination. "Sorry," Draco said quietly. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to show Mother the thing I built in the garden, but it can wait." "No," Harry said quickly, pulling back from Narcissa's embrace. "Don't go. What did you build? Can I see it too?" Draco's face brightened immediately. "Really? You want to see?" "Of course I do. You're always building interesting things." Harry stood up, brushing dirt from his knees. "Mrs. Malfoy, may we go look at Draco's project?" "Certainly," Narcissa said, though she was watching both boys with a thoughtful expression. "Lead the way, Draco." They followed Draco out of the greenhouse and across the perfectly manicured lawn to where he'd apparently spent the morning constructing an elaborate fort out of fallen branches and garden stones. It was actually quite impressive for an 8-year-old's work, cleverly engineered and surprisingly sturdy. "It's brilliant," Harry said with genuine admiration. "How did you make it so stable?" Draco's chest puffed up with pride. "I used a sticking charm I learned from watching Father. Well, sort of. I'm not old enough for a proper sticking charm, but I managed something that works almost as well." "Could you teach me?" Harry asked. "I've never tried to do magic on purpose before today, except for the plant growing." "You did plant magic?" Draco's eyes widened with interest, all traces of uncertainty gone. "That's advanced magic, Harry. Most wizards don't attempt herbological magic until they're much older." "Mrs. Malfoy said I have a natural aptitude for it," Harry said, then quickly added, "But I'm sure you're much better at other kinds of magic. You've been learning it your whole life." "Well," Draco said consideringly, "I am quite good at levitation charms, and I can light candles without burning my fingers now. But plant magic is special. Mother says it takes a particularly gentle magical core to make things grow properly." "So we're good at different things," Harry said. "That's good, isn't it? It means we can teach each other." Draco smiled, and it was the kind of smile that transformed his whole face. "Exactly. Partners, not competitors." "Brothers," Harry corrected softly, trying out the word. "If that's all right with you." Draco's smile grew even brighter. "Brothers," he agreed, "which means I have to protect you from anyone who tries to hurt you, and you have to protect me from anyone who tries to hurt me." "Deal," Harry said solemnly, extending his hand. They shook on it with the kind of gravity that only 8-year-olds could bring to such momentous declarations, and Narcissa, watching from a few feet away, felt her heart expand with the kind of joy she'd never expected to experience. That evening, as she tucked both boys into their respective beds, Harry in his beautiful blue room, Draco in his familiar sanctuary filled with books and toys, Narcissa reflected on how much had changed in just 1 week. She'd gained a second son, Draco had gained a brother, and Harry had gained something he'd never had before, a family that chose to love him, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. "Mother?" Draco called softly from his doorway as she was saying goodnight to Harry. "Yes, darling?" "I'm glad Harry's here. I know I was a bit jealous at first, but I'm glad now. Having a brother is much better than being the only child." "I'm glad too, sweetheart," Narcissa said, her heart full to bursting. "Sleep well, both of you." As she closed their doors and made her way to her own room, Narcissa thought about the plants in the greenhouse that had responded so readily to Harry's gentle magic. Perhaps, she mused, families were like gardens. They grew best when tended with patience, love, and the understanding that every member had their own unique needs and gifts. And perhaps sometimes the most beautiful flowers came from the seeds you never expected to plant. Chapter 8. Shadows of the past. Lucius Malfoy had not achieved his position in wizarding society through sentiment alone. While his wife tended to their unexpected ward with maternal devotion, and his son discovered the joys of brotherhood, Lucius had been conducting a different sort of education, one that involved late-night correspondence with carefully cultivated contacts and discreet inquiries into matters that most people preferred not to examine too closely. The results of his investigation lay spread across his desk in the private study, each piece of parchment representing another crack in the foundation of Albus Dumbledore's carefully constructed reputation. It had taken him 2 weeks to compile this information, calling in favors and making promises to sources throughout the ministry, St. Mungo's, and various educational institutions. What he'd discovered was more damning than even he had anticipated. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come," he called, and Narcissa entered, carrying a tea service that he recognized as her way of ensuring they could speak privately without house elf interruptions. "Have you found what you were looking for?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk and noting the grim expression on her husband's face. "More than I was looking for," Lucius replied grimly. "Narcissa, what I've discovered goes far beyond simple negligence. This represents a systematic pattern of placing children in situations designed to make them dependent and controllable." He picked up the topmost parchment, a careful copy he'd obtained from a contact in the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. Neville Longbottom. Parents tortured into insanity by Bellatrix and the others when he was barely a year old. Dumbledore personally arranged for his placement with his grandmother, a woman known for her rigid traditionalism and harsh disciplinary methods, the boys showing signs of magical suppression remarkably similar to what we observed in Harry. "Good heavens," Narcissa murmured, "but surely that's just coincidence?" "Perhaps, if it were an isolated case." Lucius set down that parchment and picked up another. "Luna Lovegood. Mother died in a magical experiment when Luna was 9. Dumbledore personally intervened to prevent the girl's placement with her magical aunts in France, insisting she remain with her father, a man so lost in his grief and conspiracy theories that he barely acknowledges his daughter's existence." Narcissa's teacup rattled against its saucer as she set it down with shaking hands. "How many others?" 17 that I've been able to identify with certainty," Lucius said quietly. 17 children who lost their parents to war, accident, or illness, and were personally placed by Dumbledore in situations that isolated them from potential allies and made them dependent on his guidance. "But why?" Narcissa's voice was barely above a whisper. What could he possibly gain from such manipulation? "Control," Lucius said simply. "Think about it, Narcissa. What do all these children have in common? They're either magically powerful, politically significant, or both. Harry Potter, the boy who lived. Neville Longbottom, heir to an ancient and noble house. Luna Lovegood, whose father owns the most widely read alternative publication in Wizarding Britain." "You think he's collecting them?" Narcissa said, understanding dawning in her voice. "Creating a generation of powerful wizards who owe their salvation to him." "More than that," Lucius corrected. "I think he's creating a generation of powerful wizards who have been systematically isolated and traumatized, making them easier to manipulate when the time comes to call in the debt." The silence that followed was broken by another knock, this one more hesitant. Harry's voice came through the door, carefully polite. "Mr. Malfoy. Mrs. Malfoy. I'm sorry to bother you, but Dobby said you wanted to see me." Lucius and Narcissa exchanged glances. They'd agreed that Harry should be informed of what they were discovering, but the reality of explaining such manipulation to an 8-year-old was daunting. "Come in, sweetheart," Narcissa called, and Harry entered with the improved posture and brighter demeanor that 2 weeks of proper care had created. He was followed by Draco, who slipped in behind his adopted brother with the kind of protective instinct that had become second nature. "Are we in trouble?" Draco asked immediately, his grey eyes moving between his parents with concern. "No, darling, nothing like that," Narcissa assured them both. "We wanted to talk to you about some things we've learned about how Harry came to be placed with the Dursleys." Harry's expression grew serious. "Did you find out something bad?" "We found out that you weren't the only child placed in difficult circumstances," Lucius said carefully. "There appear to be other children whose situations are similar to yours." "Other children who were hurt?" Harry's voice was small, but there was steel in it that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. "Other children who were put with people who didn't want them?" "Yes," Lucius confirmed. "And all of these placements were arranged by the same person." "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes, which brings us to something important we need to discuss with you." Narcissa leaned forward in her chair. "Harry, we want to formally adopt you. Not just guardianship, but full adoption. You would be Harry Potter Malfoy in truth, with all the rights and protections that entails." Harry's eyes widened, and for a moment he was speechless. "You mean permanently? Forever?" "Forever," Narcissa confirmed softly. "If that's what you want." "Of course it's what I want," Harry said fiercely, and the intensity in his voice surprised all of them. "This is my home. You're my family. I don't want to go anywhere else, ever." "Even if it means disappointing some very powerful people?" Lucius asked. "Even if it means standing against expectations and traditions?" Harry straightened his shoulders in a gesture that reminded Narcissa irresistibly of Lily Evans facing down a bully. "Especially then. If powerful people think children should be hurt and scared and alone, then they're wrong, and someone should tell them so." "That's my brother," Draco said with fierce pride, moving to stand shoulder to shoulder with Harry. "We stick together." "Yes," Lucius said quietly, and there was something like awe in his voice. "I can see that you do." Before anyone could respond, Dobby appeared in the corner of the room with a soft pop, his large ears quivering with excitement and something that might have been anger. "Master Lucius, sir," the elf said breathlessly. "Dobby is finding something terrible, sir. Something Dobby is thinking you must know about young Master Harry." "What is it, Dobby?" Narcissa asked gently. "Dobby is checking young Master Harry for magical monitoring, as Master Lucius is requesting," Dobby explained, wringing his hands. "Dobby is finding tracking charms, sir. Many tracking charms. Some for location, some for magical activity, some for—" The elf's voice dropped to a horrified whisper. "Some for emotional state, sir." The silence that followed was deafening. "Emotional state?" Narcissa's voice was deadly quiet. "Yes, mistress. Someone is monitoring when young Master Harry is happy, when he is sad, when he is frightened. For years, someone is watching his feelings like reading a book." "Can you remove them?" Lucius asked, his own voice controlled with obvious effort. "Dobby can remove them, yes, sir. But Dobby is thinking you should know. When Dobby is removing them, the person who is placing them will know. They will know someone is interfering." Harry, who had been listening to this exchange with growing horror, finally found his voice. "Someone's been watching my feelings? Like a spy in my head?" "Not exactly, sweetheart," Narcissa said quickly, though her face was pale with rage. "The charms wouldn't let them read your thoughts, but they would show when you were distressed or happy or afraid." "So they knew," Harry said, and his voice was very small. "They knew the Dursleys were hurting me, because they could feel how scared and sad I was." "Yes," Lucius said grimly. "They knew. And they left me there anyway." "Yes." Harry was quiet for a long moment, his green eyes distant with thought. When he spoke again, his voice was stronger than any of them had ever heard it. "Remove them," he said to Dobby. "All of them. Right now." "Harry," Narcissa began carefully, "if we remove them, Professor Dumbledore will know that someone is helping you. It might force a confrontation before we're ready." "Good," Harry said fiercely. "Let him know. Let him know that I'm not alone anymore, and I'm not scared anymore, and I'm not going to be his puppet anymore. Let him know that I have people who love me enough to fight for me." "Well," Lucius said softly, "I suppose that answers the question of whether the boy has backbone." "Remove them, Dobby," Narcissa said firmly. "All of them. And make sure he knows who's responsible for their removal." Dobby nodded solemnly and began to wave his hands over Harry in complex patterns. As he worked, faint threads of silver light began to emerge from Harry's skin, dozens of them, some thin as hair, others as thick as rope. With each thread that Dobby severed, Harry seemed to stand a little taller, breathe a little easier. "There is being so many," Dobby muttered as he worked. "Tracking charms, monitoring charms, emotional sensors, magical suppressors, so many charms, all designed to watch and control. Dobby has never seen anything like it." "Magical suppressors?" Lucius's voice was sharp. That would explain why his accidental magic was so volatile. They weren't just watching him, they were actively hampering his magical development. When Dobby finally finished, the floor around Harry was littered with the faint, dissolving remains of dozens of magical threads. Harry swayed slightly on his feet, then steadied himself with a deep breath. "How do you feel?" Narcissa asked gently. "Lighter," Harry said wonderingly. "Like I've been carrying something heavy for so long I forgot it was there, and now it's gone." He looked at each of them in turn. "Thank you, all of you, for caring enough to look, for being angry on my behalf, for fighting for me. That's what families do, sweetheart," Narcissa said softly. "They fight for each other." 2 hours later, an anonymous owl arrived at the offices of the Daily Prophet, carrying a carefully worded summary of Harry Potter's treatment at the hands of his guardians, along with signed statements from a respected healer and documented evidence of systematic abuse. The accompanying note suggested that the public might be interested to know how the boy who lived had been living for the past 7 years. That same evening, formal adoption papers were filed with the Department of Magical Children's Services, along with a comprehensive legal brief challenging the original placement decision and requesting immediate transfer of custody to Lucius and Narcissa Malfoy. And in a castle in Scotland, an old man with twinkling eyes felt every single monitoring charm on Harry Potter wink out of existence in the span of 10 minutes, leaving him blind to the boy's location and emotional state for the first time in 8 years. The war for Harry Potter's future had begun in earnest. But for the first time since that war started, Harry Potter was not fighting alone. In the quiet of his beautiful room at Malfoy Manor, Harry lay in his comfortable bed and stared at the ceiling painted like a summer sky. For the first time in his life, no one was watching him without his knowledge. No one was monitoring his feelings, or suppressing his magic, or tracking his location. He was free. More than that, he was loved. He was protected. He was home. Let Dumbledore try to take that away from him now. Chapter 9. The Prophet's Revelation. The explosion began at dawn. Harry was still asleep in his blue bedroom when the first owls began arriving at Malfoy Manor, their wings dark against the pale morning sky. By the time he woke an hour later, the air above the estate was thick with hundreds of birds, barn owls, tawny owls, screech owls, and magnificent eagle owls, all carrying copies of the same publication. The Daily Prophet's headline stretched across the entire front page in letters that seemed to scream from the parchment, Boy who lived found, starving in Muggle cupboard. Exclusive. Healer documents 7 years of systematic abuse. Questions raised about Dumbledore's placement decision. Below the headline was a photograph that made Harry's stomach clench with recognition. The cupboard under the stairs at number 4 Privet Drive, its door standing open to reveal the thin mattress, the broken toys, the spider webs that had been his only companions for so many years. "Oh no," Harry whispered, staring at the newspaper that Dobby had brought to him with breakfast. "Oh no, oh no, oh no." The article was worse than the headline. It detailed everything: the malnutrition, the untreated injuries, the bars on his window, the way the Dursleys had told him his parents were worthless drunks. It quoted Healer Pye's clinical assessment of Harry's condition, described the magical suppression charms that had been placed on him, and included testimonies from anonymous sources about Dumbledore's other questionable placement decisions. But worst of all, it mentioned his location. Not specifically. The Malfoys had been careful about that. But it was clear that the boy who lived was now under the protection of one of Britain's most prominent pure-blood families. "Harry?" Draco's voice came through the door, uncertain and concerned. "Are you all right? Mother says we're not to go outside today, and there are owls everywhere, and—" "Come in," Harry managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Draco entered to find Harry sitting on his bed, the prophet spread before him, his face white with shock and terror. "Everyone knows," Harry said quietly. "Everyone in the entire wizarding world knows what happened to me. They know about the cupboard, and the bars, and how thin I was, and—" His voice cracked. "They know everything." Before Draco could respond, Narcissa appeared in the doorway, her expression fierce with protective anger. "Dobby told me you'd seen the paper. I'm sorry, sweetheart. We tried to keep this from happening." "But you're the ones who sent the information to the prophet," Harry said, not accusingly but with confusion. "Didn't you know they would print it?" "We knew they would print it," Narcissa admitted, settling on the bed beside him. "But we hoped they would be more discreet about identifying you specifically. We underestimated how sensational they would make the story." "Why?" Harry asked, tears starting to roll down his cheeks. "Why did everyone have to know? Now they'll all be looking at me, and talking about me, and feeling sorry for me, and I just wanted to be normal. I just wanted to be Harry, not the boy who lived or the boy from the cupboard or any of those things." "Oh, my darling," Narcissa murmured, pulling him into her arms. I know it's awful to have your private pain made public. But Harry, what happened to you was a crime, and crimes have to be exposed before they can be punished. But everyone will stare," Harry whispered against her shoulder. "Everyone will know exactly how pathetic and unwanted I was." "No," Draco said fiercely, moving to sit on Harry's other side. "Anyone who reads that article will know exactly how strong and brave you are. You survived 7 years of something that would have broken most people, and you still have the kindness to worry about a house elf's feelings and the courage to stand up to Professor Dumbledore himself." "Draco's right," Narcissa agreed softly. "The people who matter will see your strength, not your suffering. And the people who only see your suffering don't matter." A sharp knock on the door interrupted them, and Lucius entered without waiting for permission. His face was grim, but there was satisfaction in his eyes. "The response has been significant," he said without preamble. "The prophet's officers have received over 300 letters in the past 2 hours, most of them demanding an investigation into the placement. The ministry is being flooded with howlers, and most importantly, the Wizengamot has agreed to hold emergency sessions to review the matter." "What does that mean?" Harry asked, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "It means formal hearings," Lucius explained. "Official proceedings where evidence will be presented and decisions made about your future. It means accountability for everyone involved in your placement and care." "Will I have to testify?" Harry's voice was small with dread. "Will I have to stand up in front of everyone and talk about what they did to me?" "Not if we can help it," Narcissa said firmly. "Children your age rarely testify in Wizengamot proceedings. The healer's reports and other documentation should be sufficient." "But what about Professor Dumbledore?" Harry asked. "He'll be there, won't he? He'll try to make them send me back." "Professor Dumbledore," Lucius said grimly, "is currently dealing with his own problems. His public statement this morning has not been well received." "What did he say?" Draco asked, his grey eyes bright with curiosity. Lucius pulled out a second copy of the Prophet and opened it to an inner page. "He claims that the blood protection afforded by Harry's mother's sacrifice was worth any temporary discomfort Harry might have experienced. He suggests that the Malfoys are using Harry for political gain, and that removing him from his relatives' care may have compromised magical protections that could be crucial for his future safety." "Temporary discomfort," Harry repeated, his voice flat with disbelief. "Yes. The phrase has not been popular with the public, particularly the parents of magical children, who seem to find the idea that 7 years of abuse could be dismissed as temporary discomfort rather offensive." As if summoned by their conversation, another wave of owls began arriving outside the windows. Dobby appeared with a small pop, carrying a sack that was nearly as large as he was. "More letters, Master Lucius," the elf squeaked. "Dobby is not knowing what to do with them all. They is coming so fast." "What do they say?" Harry asked nervously. Dobby's ears perked up with what might have been excitement. "Many of them is for young Master Harry, sir. People is sending good wishes and presents and saying they is proud of him for being so brave." "Proud?" Harry's voice cracked with surprise. "They're proud of me." "Very proud," Dobby confirmed, pulling a letter from the top of the sack. "This one is from a witch in Scotland who is saying her own son was bullied at school, and reading about young Master Harry is giving her courage to fight for him. And this one is from a family in Wales who is sending chocolate because they is thinking young Master Harry deserves all the sweets he was denied. And this one," Narcissa said gently, taking another letter from the pile, "is from a group of Hogwarts students who want Harry to know that they think he's the bravest person they've ever heard of, and they hope he gets to be happy and safe now." Harry stared at the letters in amazement. "People I've never met are writing to me? Just to say nice things?" "More than nice things," Lucius said, his voice carrying a note of wonder. "Harry, you've become a symbol, not just of survival, but of the right of all magical children to be safe and loved. People are using your story to demand better protections for orphans, better oversight of guardianship arrangements, better support for families in crisis." "I never wanted to be a symbol," Harry said quietly. "I just wanted to be a person." "You are a person," Narcissa assured him. "You're our person, and nothing will change that. But sometimes, Harry, being a person means that your personal story becomes larger than yourself. Sometimes it becomes a light that helps other people find their way out of their own darkness." They were interrupted by the arrival of yet another owl, this one bearing the official seal of the Wizengamot. Lucius opened the letter and read it quickly, his expression growing increasingly pleased. "The emergency session has been scheduled for 3 days hence," he announced. "All parties involved in the original placement decision have been summoned to provide testimony. The charges being considered include child endangerment, failure of duty of care, and abuse of authority." "Will they really hold Professor Dumbledore accountable?" Harry asked, hardly daring to hope. "They will if we have anything to say about it," Narcissa said grimly. No one places a child in harm's way and walks away without consequences. Not while I have breath in my body. The fierce protectiveness in her voice made something warm and safe unfurl in Harry's chest. For the first time since seeing the morning's headlines, he felt like maybe this exposure wasn't entirely terrible. Maybe people needed to know what had happened, not so they could pity him, but so they could make sure it never happened to anyone else. "Mrs. Malfoy," he said quietly, "if this helps other children like me who are scared and alone and don't know that there are people who would fight for them, then maybe it's worth it. Maybe they need to know that there are adults who will stand up to powerful people when children are being hurt." Narcissa's eyes filled with tears, and she pulled him closer against her side. "Oh, my brave, wonderful boy. Yes, I think maybe they do need to know that." "And they need to know," Draco added, moving closer to his brother, "that children who have been hurt can still grow up to be strong and kind and loved. They need to know that surviving terrible things doesn't make you broken. It makes you brave." Outside the windows, the owls continued to circle, bringing message after message of support, outrage on Harry's behalf, and demands for justice. In the distance, Harry could see reporters gathering at the front gates, their quick quotes quills ready to capture any statement or appearance. "Are they going to camp there until the hearing?" Harry asked, watching the growing crowd with trepidation. "Probably," Lucius admitted. "But don't worry. The wards will keep them from getting onto the grounds, and we have no intention of allowing any interviews or photographs. Your privacy, such as it is, will be protected." "What about after the hearing?" Harry asked quietly. "What happens then?" "Then," Narcissa said firmly, "you continue being exactly who you are, our son, Draco's brother, and a boy who deserves every happiness the world can offer. The public will move on to other scandals. The reporters will find other stories, and you'll have the chance to grow up surrounded by people who love you." "Do you really think we'll win?" Harry asked. "Do you think the Wizengamot will rule in our favor?" "I think," Lucius said, with the kind of cold satisfaction that reminded Harry why Lucius Malfoy was considered one of the most formidable political minds in Wizarding Britain, "that after reading the evidence we've compiled and hearing the testimony we've arranged, the Wizengamot will find it very difficult to rule any other way." "What evidence?" Draco asked with interest. "What testimony?" "Well," Lucius said, his grey eyes gleaming, "it seems that several other families have come forward with their own stories about questionable placements arranged by Professor Dumbledore, and a number of ministry officials who have harbored private concerns about certain decisions have suddenly found their courage to speak publicly." "You've been busy," Narcissa observed with approval. "I've been thorough," Lucius corrected. "When you aim for the king, you must not miss." Harry looked between his adoptive parents, for that was what they were in every way that mattered, and felt a fierce surge of gratitude and love. These people had taken a broken, frightened child and given him not just safety and comfort, but the chance to be part of something larger than himself. They had turned his pain into purpose, his suffering into strength. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for fighting for me, for caring enough to make this public, even though it's complicated and difficult, for making sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to other children." "Thank you," Narcissa replied softly, "for trusting us enough to let us fight for you, for being brave enough to speak your truth, even when it's frightening." Outside, the owls continued to circle, and the reporters continued to gather, and somewhere in Scotland, an old man with twinkling eyes was learning that reputation, like trust, was something that once broken could never be fully repaired. But inside Malfoy Manor, in a room painted like a summer sky, a boy who had spent too many years in darkness was finally beginning to understand what it meant to be truly, completely, unconditionally loved. And that, Harry thought, as he settled between his mother and brother to read the letters from strangers who cared about his welfare, was worth any amount of public scrutiny. Chapter 10. Bonds of Blood and Choice. The Wizengamot Chamber was a place designed to inspire awe and trepidation in equal measure. Ancient stone walls rose to impossible heights, carved with the faces of long-dead wizards, whose eyes seemed to track movement across the circular floor. Torches burned in iron brackets, casting dancing shadows that made the purple-robed figures in the tiered seating appear to shift and whisper among themselves like living gargoyles. Harry sat in the witness section between Narcissa and Lucius, his small hands clasped tightly in his lap, as he tried not to stare at the imposing figure of Chief Warlock Bagnold, presiding over the proceedings from her elevated throne. He'd never seen so many important-looking people in one place, all of them focused on discussing his life as though he were a particularly interesting legal puzzle, rather than a frightened 8-year-old boy. "The matter before us today," Chief Warlock Bagnold announced, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, "concerns the petition for adoption filed by Lucius and Narcissa Malfoy regarding one Harry James Potter, and the challenge to the original guardianship placement arranged by Chief Warlock Dumbledore in 1981. At the mention of his name, murmurs rippled through the assembled Wizengamot members. Harry felt heat rise in his cheeks and pressed closer to Narcissa's side, grateful when her arm came around him in a protective embrace. "Chief Warlock Dumbledore," Bagnold continued, "you may present your defense of the original placement decision." Dumbledore rose from his seat in the defendant's section, his blue robes rustling as he moved to the center of the chamber. Even here, faced with formal legal proceedings that could destroy his reputation, he maintained his characteristic air of serene confidence. "Honored members of the Wizengamot," he began, his voice carrying the weight of decades of accumulated respect and authority. The placement of young Harry Potter with his maternal relatives was not a decision made lightly, nor was it made without careful consideration of magical protections that transcend the concerns of mere physical comfort. Harry felt Narcissa's arm tighten around him at the phrase, mere physical comfort, and he could practically feel the anger radiating from Lucius beside them. "The blood protection afforded by his mother's sacrifice," Dumbledore continued, "created a magical shield around the boy that could only be maintained through residence with his blood relatives. This protection has kept him safe from the followers of Voldemort for 7 years, and removing him from that environment may well have compromised safeguards that could prove crucial to his survival." "And you believe," Chief Warlock Bagnold asked carefully, "that this magical protection justified the documented abuse the child suffered?" "I believe," Dumbledore replied with the kind of gentle certainty that had convinced generations of wizards to trust his judgment, "that temporary hardship in service of ultimate survival was a necessary sacrifice. The boy lived, Madam Chief Warlock. In the greater scheme of things, that is what matters." The murmurs that rose from the Wizengamot benches this time were not approving. Harry caught fragments of shocked whispers, temporary hardship, and necessary sacrifice, and 7 years of torture, that suggested Dumbledore's argument was not being received as warmly as he might have hoped. "Furthermore," Dumbledore pressed on, seeming to sense that his position was not as strong as he'd anticipated, "I submit that the Malfoys' motives in this matter are not purely altruistic. The political advantages of controlling the boy who lived, the social status gained from adopting such a famous child, these considerations cannot be dismissed." "How dare you?" Narcissa said, quietly. But her voice carried clearly through the chamber. She stood gracefully, her blue eyes blazing with maternal fury. "How dare you suggest that my love for this child is anything other than genuine?" "Mrs. Malfoy," Chief Warlock Bagnold said gently, "you will have your opportunity to respond. Please be seated." But Narcissa remained standing, her dignity and anger creating a presence that commanded attention even in this chamber of powerful wizards. "No, Madam Chief Warlock, I will respond now. This man condemned a 1-year-old baby to 7 years of starvation and abuse, and when confronted with evidence of that child's suffering, he dismisses it as acceptable collateral damage. He sits there now and suggests that I would use a frightened, traumatized child for political gain. I will not allow such accusations to stand unchallenged." "The blood protection," Dumbledore began. "Has been compromised," interrupted a new voice from the expert witness section. Master Artificer Ollivander rose from his seat, ancient and wise, and carrying an authority that rivaled Dumbledore's own. "I have completed a comprehensive magical assessment of young Mr. Potter at the Wizengamot's request, and I can state with certainty that whatever protections may have once existed have been corrupted by the very abuse they were meant to justify." The chamber fell silent, except for the crackling of torches. "Explain," Chief Warlock Bagnold commanded. "Blood protection magic requires love to function," Ollivander said simply. "Not mere blood relation, but genuine affection and care. When a child is systematically abused by the very relatives meant to provide that love, the magic turns toxic. Rather than protection, it becomes a form of magical poison that suppresses the child's natural abilities and leaves him more vulnerable than he would be without any protection at all." Dumbledore's face had gone very pale. "That cannot be correct. The ancient magic of sacrifice is real and powerful," Ollivander agreed, "but it is also delicate. Love cannot be forced, Chief Warlock Dumbledore, and protection built on a foundation of hatred and cruelty will inevitably crumble. The boy's magical signature shows clear evidence of systematic suppression, emotional trauma, and protective barriers that have been corrupted into instruments of harm." "Then what protection does he have now?" one of the Wizengamot members called out. Ollivander smiled, and for the first time since entering the chamber, Harry felt a spark of hope. "He has something far more powerful than corrupted blood magic, honored member. He has chosen family magic, bonds forged not by obligation, but by love freely given and received. The magical resonance between young Mr. Potter and the Malfoys is among the strongest I have ever measured." "How is that possible?" Dumbledore demanded. "The boy has known them for less than a month." "Love," Narcissa said quietly, "is not measured in time, Chief Warlock Dumbledore. It is measured in commitment, in sacrifice, in the willingness to fight for someone else's happiness above your own. Harry became my son the moment I chose to protect him, just as I became his mother the moment he chose to trust me." "The magical evidence supports Mrs. Malfoy's claim," Ollivander confirmed. "The protective bonds forming around this family unit are already stronger than anything that existed at Privet Drive. More importantly, they are based on genuine affection rather than forced obligation." Chief Warlock Bagnold leaned forward in her chair. "Mr. Potter, you have remained silent through these proceedings. Do you wish to address the Wizengamot yourself?" Harry looked up at her with wide, green eyes, his heart hammering against his ribs. The idea of speaking in front of all these important, powerful adults was terrifying. But as he glanced at Narcissa's encouraging smile and felt Lucius's steady presence beside him, he realized that he did have something to say. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly, standing on legs that shook only slightly. "I would like to say something." "You may speak, child." Harry took a deep breath and looked directly at Dumbledore, this man who had shaped so much of his life without ever bothering to check on his welfare. "Professor Dumbledore," he said, his young voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber, "you say that what happened to me was temporary hardship for the greater good. But it wasn't temporary for me. 7 years is most of my whole life. And it wasn't hardship, it was torture. They locked me in a cupboard smaller than some people's closets. They fed me just enough to keep me alive. They told me every single day that I was worthless and unwanted, and that my parents died because they were as freakish as I was. Dumbledore's expression was pained, but Harry wasn't finished. You say the Malfoys might be using me for political advantage, but they've never asked me to be anything other than myself. They don't care that I'm famous or that I survived something as a baby. They care that I like to read stories and help with the garden, and that I laugh when Draco tells jokes. They love me because I'm Harry, not because I'm the boy who lived. He turned to look at Narcissa and Lucius, his eyes bright with tears, but his voice steady with conviction. Mrs. Malfoy reads me stories every night and teaches me about magic like it's something wonderful instead of freakish. Mr. Malfoy teaches me about laws and rights and how to stand up for myself. Draco shows me how to be a brother and a friend. They make me feel safe and wanted and loved, and I don't want to live anywhere else ever again. The silence that followed was profound. Even the torches seemed to burn more quietly, as though the chamber itself was holding its breath. Furthermore, Harry continued, drawing himself up to his full height, which wasn't much, but his dignity made him seem taller. If the blood protection you're so worried about is already broken, then there's no reason I can't choose where I want to live. And I choose to live with my family. My real family. The one that chose me back. He sat down heavily, his legs finally giving out from the combination of fear and determination, and immediately felt Narcissa's arms around him and Lucius's steady hand on his shoulder. Remarkable, someone whispered from the Wizengamot benches. Absolutely remarkable. Chief Warlock Bagnold cleared her throat. Master Ollivander, in your expert opinion, would completing a formal adoption between the Malfoys and Mr. Potter strengthen or weaken his magical protections? It would strengthen them considerably, Ollivander replied without hesitation. The bonds I've observed forming naturally would become permanent and legally reinforced. Combined with the considerable magical protections available to one of our oldest and most powerful families, young Mr. Potter would be far safer than he has been at any point since his parents' death. And the question of magical guardianship? Mr. Potter is still several years from his majority. The Malfoys have demonstrated both the capability and the inclination to provide proper magical education and protection. Their son is well-adjusted and magically competent, and their household is stable and loving. I can think of no better environment for a powerful young wizard to develop his abilities. Dumbledore made one last attempt. The prophecy, Lucius interrupted, speaking for the first time since the proceedings began, is your obsession, not ours. We are not raising Harry to be your weapon against future threats. We are raising him to be our son. Whatever destiny he may face as an adult, he will face it from a foundation of love and confidence rather than trauma and manipulation. The quiet authority in Lucius's voice was absolute, and Harry felt something warm and secure settle in his chest at being claimed so completely and publicly. Chief Warlock Bagnold nodded slowly. The Wizengamot will now deliberate. But before she could call for recess, one of the elder members stood. Madame Chief Warlock, I don't believe deliberation is necessary. The evidence is overwhelming. The expert testimony is conclusive, and the child's own wishes are clear. I move for immediate approval of the adoption petition and censure of Chief Warlock Dumbledore for reckless endangerment of a minor. Seconded, called another voice, and then another, until the chamber echoed with voices supporting the motion. The motion carries, Chief Warlock Bagnold announced, and her voice carried a note of satisfaction. The adoption petition is approved, Harry James Potter is hereby recognized as Harry James Potter Malfoy, with all rights and protections afforded to a member of the ancient and noble house of Malfoy. Furthermore, a formal censure is entered into the record regarding the original placement decision." The gavel fell with a sound like thunder, and Harry felt his world shift irrevocably. He was home. Legally, magically, completely home. As the chamber erupted in voices and movement, as reporters scribbled frantically, and Wizengamot members approached to offer their congratulations, Harry found himself wrapped in his parents' arms, his real parents, now and forever, and felt the last of his fear and uncertainty melt away. "Welcome to the family, officially," Lucius murmured against his hair, and there was wonder in his voice, as though he was surprised by the depth of his own feelings. "My son," Narcissa whispered, tears streaming down her face. "My brave, wonderful son." And Harry, who had spent 8 years believing he was unwanted and unloved, finally understood what it meant to belong somewhere completely and unconditionally. The boy who lived was gone. In his place stood Harry Potter Malfoy, beloved son and cherished brother, protected by law and magic, and most importantly, by love. It was the most powerful magic of all. Chapter 11. The New Normal. The first snowfall of the season came early that year, dusting the grounds of Malfoy Manor in pristine white that made the ancient estate look like something from a fairy tale. Harry pressed his nose against the frosted window of the library, watching the fat flakes drift past the glass, and marveled at how different this winter felt from any he'd experienced before. It had been 2 months since the Wizengamot hearing, 2 months since he'd officially become Harry James Potter Malfoy, and the transformation in his life still sometimes felt too good to be true. The scared, hollow-eyed boy who had arrived at the manor in September was gone, replaced by someone who laughed easily, spoke up for himself, and fell asleep each night secure in the knowledge that he was loved and wanted. "The pond will be perfect for skating if this keeps up," Draco said from where he was stretched out on the rug in front of the fireplace, a transfiguration primer open beside him. "Father says he'll teach us both if the ice gets thick enough." "I've never been skating," Harry admitted, settling cross-legged beside his brother. "The Dursleys never. Well, they never took me anywhere fun." "Then it'll be brilliant," Draco said, with the easy confidence of someone who had never doubted that good things would happen to him. "You'll love it. And when you inevitably fall down, I'll laugh at you, and then help you up, because that's what brothers do." Harry grinned. The casual way Draco talked about their brotherhood still filled him with warm amazement. After 8 years of being told he was unwanted and burdensome, having someone claim him so completely and joyfully felt like a miracle he'd never quite get used to. "Boys," Narcissa called from the library doorway, "Professor Snape has arrived for your lessons." Both boys looked up eagerly. What had started as an uncomfortable attempt at diplomacy had evolved into something none of them had expected. Severus Snape had become a regular and welcome presence at Malfoy Manor, arriving twice a week to tutor both boys in magical theory and basic potion-making. His teaching style was demanding but fair, and his dry humor had proven surprisingly well-suited to engaging 2 bright 8-year-olds. More importantly, his presence had given Harry access to stories about his mother that no one else could tell. Small details about Lily Evans's personality, her favorite spells, the way she'd hummed while brewing potions, the fierce loyalty she'd shown to her friends. Each story was a gift that helped Harry build a more complete picture of the woman who had died to save him. "Are we working on the pepper-up potion today?" Harry asked, as they made their way to the small potions laboratory Lucius had installed specifically for these lessons. "Among other things," Snape replied, his black robes billowing behind him as they descended the stone steps. "But first, I want to see how your magical control has progressed since our last session." The potions laboratory was warm and well lit, with copper cauldrons gleaming on the work tables and ingredients organized in neat rows along the shelves. It was nothing like the dark, intimidating dungeon where Snape would eventually terrorize students at Hogwarts. This was a space designed for learning and discovery, rather than fear and intimidation. "Harry, show me your flame charm," Snape instructed, settling into his chair behind the main workbench. "And Draco, I want to see that levitation spell you were practicing." Both boys took their positions and began to demonstrate their progress. Harry's flame charm had evolved from the wild, uncontrolled bursts of magic he'd produced during his emotional upheavals to a steady, controllable flame that danced obediently above his palm. Draco's levitation had improved dramatically as well, allowing him to lift and move objects with precision rather than the jerky, erratic movements that had characterized his earlier attempts. "Excellent," Snape said with genuine approval, and Harry felt the familiar warm glow that came from earning praise from someone whose opinion he'd come to value. "Your magical control has improved remarkably since the removal of those monitoring charms. It's as though your magic was being artificially constrained and is now free to develop naturally." "Professor," Harry said carefully, "may I ask you something?" Snape raised an eyebrow. "You may ask. I may or may not answer. Do you think my mother would be proud of how I'm learning magic now? I mean, with a real family and proper lessons instead of just accidents when I was scared or angry." The question hung in the air for a long moment, and Harry saw something soft and vulnerable flicker across Snape's usually impassive features. "Yes," Snape said quietly. "I think she would be very proud. Your mother believed that magic should be a source of joy and wonder, not fear and shame. Seeing you learn to control and channel your abilities with confidence and enthusiasm, yes, I think she would be deeply proud." "What about my father?" Draco asked, surprising everyone. "Would Harry's father be proud too?" Snape was quiet for so long that Harry began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Your father was many things, Harry. Arrogant, reckless, too fond of showing off. But he was also brave, loyal, and deeply committed to protecting the people he loved. I think he would be proud to see that his son has inherited his courage while avoiding his more troublesome traits." It was the closest thing to a compliment about James Potter that Harry had ever heard from Snape, and he treasured it accordingly. "Now," Snape said briskly, clearly eager to move away from emotional territory, "let's see how well you can apply that magical control to brewing. Today we'll be working on a healing draft. Simple enough for your skill level, but requiring precise temperature control and timing." They spent the next hour bent over their cauldrons, learning to judge the color of simmering potions and the precise moment to add each ingredient. Harry discovered he had an intuitive understanding of the brewing process that reminded him of his success with plant magic. Both required patience, attention, and a gentle touch rather than force. "Your mother's gift," Snape murmured as he observed Harry's technique. She had the same natural instinct for when a potion was ready for the next ingredient. As their lesson concluded, and Snape prepared to leave, Narcissa appeared with a request that had become routine over the past few weeks. "Severus, you'll join us for dinner, of course. Cook has prepared that beef stew you enjoy, and I believe Lucius wanted to discuss the revised curriculum with you." "I suppose I could stay," Snape said, with the kind of feigned reluctance that fooled no one. The truth was, these family dinners had become as important to him as they were to Harry. For the first time since Lily's death, he had a place where he was welcomed not for his usefulness or his skills, but simply for himself. Dinner at Malfoy Manor had evolved into something warm and boisterous that bore no resemblance to the formal, silent meals Harry remembered from his brief glimpses of Dursley family dinners. Conversation flowed freely between topics ranging from magical theory to current events, to gentle teasing about Draco's latest attempts to charm the peacocks into following him around the gardens. "Harry," Lucius said as the main course was served, "I've received confirmation from the Ministry about your magical registration. You're now officially enrolled in the preliminary education program, which means you'll begin receiving age-appropriate magical instruction materials in the new year." "What does that mean exactly?" Harry asked, cutting his roast beef with the proper knife skills Narcissa had taught him. "It means formal preparation for Hogwarts," Narcissa explained. "Reading lists, basic magical theory, introduction to wizarding history and customs. All the foundation work you'll need to succeed when you start school at 11. "We'll do it together," Draco added immediately. "I'm enrolled in the same program. We can study together and help each other with the difficult bits." "That's assuming you can keep up with me," Harry said, with a grin that took any sting out of the words. "Ha! I've been studying magic my whole life," Draco retorted. "You've got some catching up to do, brother." "Boys," Lucius said mildly, but his tone carried amusement rather than reproof. "Perhaps you could channel that competitive spirit into actually excelling at your studies, rather than arguing about who might excel more." "Where's the fun in that?" both boys said in unison, then dissolved into laughter at their synchronization. Snape, watching this interplay from across the table, felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the simple pleasure of belonging to something warm and genuine. These people had become more than allies or colleagues. They had become friends, and Harry had become, well, not quite the son Snape had never had, but perhaps the closest thing to family he was ever likely to know. After dinner, they gathered in the main parlour, where a fire crackled merrily in the grate, and the first Christmas decorations had begun to appear. Narcissa was embroidering what looked like a tree skirt, while Lucius read the evening paper. Draco sprawled on the rug, working on a letter to his cousin in France, and Harry curled up in his favourite chair with a book about famous magical creatures. "Harry," Narcissa said softly, looking up from her embroidery, "have you given any thought to what you'd like for Christmas?" Harry's hands stilled on his book. Christmas. He'd never been allowed to want anything for Christmas. The Dursleys had made sure of that. Dudley's pile of presents had been a reminder of everything Harry couldn't have, and his own token gift, usually something practical like socks or a broken pencil, had been presented as more than he deserved. I don't know," he admitted quietly. "I've never really thought about it before." The room went very still. Even after all these months, Harry's casual revelations about his past life still had the power to wound the people who loved him. "Well," Narcissa said brightly, "that gives us plenty of time to figure it out. Christmas at Malfoy Manor is quite an event. We'll need to make sure your first real Christmas is absolutely perfect." "What's Christmas usually like here?" Harry asked, curious. "Magic," Draco said simply. "Literally and figuratively. The house is decorated from top to bottom. There's always snow on Christmas morning, whether the weather cooperates or not. And the presents," he grinned. "Well, let's just say Father doesn't believe in modest gift-giving." "It's not about the presents," Narcissa said gently. "It's about celebrating family and love and the joy of being together. Though I admit we do rather spoil each other terribly." "Speaking of which," Lucius said, looking up from his paper, "I've been thinking about having a proper Christmas party this year. Nothing too elaborate, just close friends and family. It would be a good opportunity to reintroduce Harry to wizarding society on our terms, in a comfortable setting." "Who would come?" Harry asked, a flutter of nervousness rising in his chest. "People who matter to us," Narcissa assured him. "Professor Snape, of course. Perhaps the Parkinsons. Their daughter Pansy is about your age. A few ministry colleagues of your father's who have become genuine friends over the years. No one who would make you uncomfortable or treat you as a curiosity." "It sounds wonderful," Harry said, and realized with some surprise that he meant it. The idea of meeting new people, of being introduced as Harry Potter Malfoy, beloved son and brother, rather than as the tragic boy who lived, filled him with anticipation rather than dread. "Then it's settled," Lucius declared. "We'll have a proper Christmas celebration. Harry's first real Christmas should be memorable. As the evening wound down and it came time for Snape to leave, Harry found himself following the professor to the front hall. "Professor," he called softly. Snape turned, his expression curious. "Yes, Harry? I just wanted to say thank you. For the lessons and the stories about my mother, and for being our friend. I know you didn't have to care about what happened to me, but you did. And that means a lot." For a moment, Snape's carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. "It has been my privilege, Harry," he said quietly. "Your mother would have wanted you to be happy and loved. Knowing that you are, it's a gift I hadn't expected to receive. Will you come to our Christmas party?" "Wild hippogriffs couldn't keep me away," Snape said solemnly, and Harry's answering smile was bright enough to light the entire hall. Later that night, as Narcissa tucked him into bed and read him a story about Christmas magic, Harry reflected on how completely his life had changed. 8 months ago, he'd been a frightened, unwanted child locked in a cupboard and told he was worthless. Now he was a beloved son with a brother, parents who adored him, friends who valued him, and a future full of possibilities. "Mother," he said softly, as Narcissa finished the story and leaned down to kiss his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. I love you, all of you, more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." "We love you too, darling boy," she whispered against his hair. "More than all the magic in the world." As she closed the door and left him to drift off to sleep in his beautiful room with his summer sky ceiling, Harry thought about Christmas morning, his first real Christmas morning, still weeks away. He imagined waking up in this soft bed to the sound of Draco's excited voice calling from down the hall. He imagined running downstairs in his warm pajamas to find presents with his name on them, presents chosen with love and given with joy. Most of all, he imagined the faces of his family, his real family, the one that had chosen him, bright with happiness as they celebrated the most magical holiday of all, the celebration of love and hope and the miracle of belonging somewhere completely. It would be, Harry thought, as sleep finally claimed him, the most wonderful Christmas in the history of Christmas. And for the first time in his life, that wasn't just wishful thinking. It was a promise. Chapter 12. Looking forward. The morning of July 31st dawned bright and clear, with golden sunlight streaming through the tall windows of Malfoy Manor and birdsong echoing across the perfectly manicured grounds. Harry woke not to the sound of Uncle Vernon's shouting, or the clatter of breakfast being prepared for everyone except him, but to soft knocking on his bedroom door and Draco's excited voice calling through the wood. "Harry, Harry, wake up! Do you know what day it is?" Harry smiled before he was even fully awake, the warmth in his chest having nothing to do with the summer sunshine. "It's my birthday," he called back, and the words felt like magic in his mouth. Not because birthdays were inherently magical, though at Malfoy Manor they often literally were, but because this would be his first birthday, celebrated with joy, rather than ignored with cruel indifference. "May I come in?" Draco asked, and Harry could hear the barely contained excitement in his voice. "Of course." Draco burst through the door carrying a breakfast tray, laden with all of Harry's favorite foods, fresh strawberries and cream, perfectly buttered toast, eggs prepared exactly the way he liked them, and hot chocolate in the special mug Narcissa had bought him that changed colors when warm liquid was poured into it. "Mother says you're to have breakfast in bed because it's your birthday, and birthday boys should be thoroughly spoiled," Draco announced, setting the tray carefully on Harry's lap. "And I'm supposed to keep you company while you eat so you don't get lonely." "As if I could be lonely with you chattering at me," Harry said fondly, making room on the bed for his brother to settle beside him. I don't chatter, Draco protested. I provide sparkling conversation and witty commentary on current events. Is that what you call it? They grinned at each other, the easy banter a testament to how comfortable they'd become in their brotherhood. It had been almost 11 months since Harry's arrival at the manor. 11 months since Dobby had rescued a starving, frightened child from a cupboard under the stairs and brought him to a family that would teach him what it meant to be loved. The transformation had been remarkable. The hollow-eyed boy who had flinched at sudden movements and apologized for existing had grown into a confident, happy child who laughed easily, spoke his mind without fear, and fell asleep each night secure in the knowledge that he was wanted and cherished. His magical abilities, freed from the suppression of monitoring charms and emotional trauma, had flourished under proper instruction. His body had filled out with regular meals and care, and his spirit had healed under the gentle attention of people who loved him unconditionally. So, Draco said as Harry worked his way through the spectacular breakfast, are you excited about your presents? There are presents? Harry asked, though his tone was teasing rather than genuinely surprised. The Malfoys had proven themselves to be enthusiastic gift-givers on every possible occasion, and his birthday was certainly not going to be an exception. Are there presents? Draco scoffed. Harry, we've been planning this for weeks. Mother has been practically vibrating with excitement, and Father keeps making mysterious trips to London that he claims are for business, but are clearly birthday-related. Even Professor Snape has been looking smugger than usual, which is saying something. The mention of Snape made Harry smile. The professor had become a regular fixture at family celebrations, his dry wit and surprising capacity for affection having earned him a permanent place in their circle. What had started as an uncomfortable diplomatic necessity had evolved into genuine friendship, and Harry treasured the stories about his parents that Snape shared during their potions lessons. When do I get to open them? Harry asked, trying to sound casual and failing completely. After breakfast, obviously. Mother says anticipation improves everything, though I think she just likes watching you bounce with excitement. Harry laughed, recognizing the truth in that statement. Narcissa had taken to gift-giving with the enthusiasm of someone making up for lost time, which, in a way, she was. Every present was chosen with careful thought for Harry's interests and preferences. Every celebration planned to show him how much joy his presence brought to their lives. When breakfast was finished, they made their way downstairs to find the morning room transformed with ribbons and flowers, a table laden with gifts wrapped in emerald paper, and Narcissa and Lucius waiting with expressions of barely contained delight. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Narcissa said, pulling Harry into a warm embrace that smelled of roses and magic. 9 years old. I can hardly believe how much you've grown. In every way that matters, Lucius added, his hand settling on Harry's shoulder, with the kind of paternal pride that still made Harry's chest tight with emotion. You've become quite the remarkable young man, Harry. The gifts were wonderful. Books on magical theory and history, a beautiful set of quills that wrote in whatever color Harry was thinking of, an enchanted chess set that offered helpful suggestions when he was learning new strategies, and a photograph album filled with pictures from his first year with the Malfoys. But the best gift came last, presented by Dobby with a ceremonial bow that made his ears flap. "Young Master Harry," the elf said solemnly, "Dobby is having something special for your birthday." The package was small and wrapped in simple brown paper, but when Harry opened it, he gasped in wonder. Inside was a delicate silver locket, and when he opened it, a moving photograph smiled up at him. His parents, Lily and James Potter, young and happy, and so very much in love. "How did you—" Harry whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "Dobby is finding it," the elf explained gently, "in the ruins of your parents' house. It was being hidden under debris, protected by your mother's magic. Dobby is thinking you should have it." Harry stared at the photograph, watching his father laugh silently, while his mother leaned into his embrace, both of them looking directly at the camera as though they could see their son watching them across the years. It was the most precious thing he'd ever owned. "Thank you," he whispered to Dobby, then looked up at his adoptive family with eyes bright with tears. "Thank you all. This is the most wonderful birthday I could ever imagine." "It's only the beginning," Narcissa said softly. "You have so many birthdays ahead of you, sweetheart. So many celebrations and joys and adventures." Later that afternoon, as they sat in the garden, enjoying the warm summer weather and the remnants of Harry's birthday cake, an owl arrived with a thick envelope bearing an official seal. Lucius opened it with interest, his expression growing pleased as he read. "What is it?" Narcissa asked. "A letter from the Hogwarts Board of Governors," Lucius replied. "It seems they've reviewed Harry's educational progress and magical development, and they're recommending him for advanced placement in the preliminary curriculum. When he starts Hogwarts in 2 years, he'll be well ahead of his year-mates in magical theory and practical application." "To yours," Draco said wistfully. "I wish I could go with you from the beginning, instead of having to wait another year after you start." "Hey," Harry said, nudging his brother with his elbow, "we'll both be there soon enough. And besides, you'll need that extra year to catch up to my superior intellect." "Superior intellect?" Draco squawked indignantly. "I'll show you superior intellect, you—" "Boys," Narcissa interrupted with gentle amusement. "Perhaps you could save the intellectual competition for when you're actually at Hogwarts?" "Where's the fun in that?" they said in unison, then dissolved into laughter at their synchronization. Watching her sons, both of them, legally and completely hers now. Narcissa felt her heart swell with a happiness so profound it almost hurt. A year ago, she'd been the mother of one lonely child, fulfilled but always aware that something was missing. Now she was the mother of 2 boys who brought light and laughter into every room they entered, who challenged each other and supported each other, and made their family complete in ways she'd never expected. "What are you thinking about?" Lucius asked quietly, settling onto the garden bench beside her. "Just how perfect this is," she replied softly. "How right it feels. I know we didn't plan for Harry, but I can't imagine our family without him now." "Nor can I," Lucius agreed, watching as the boys abandoned their mock argument in favor of trying to teach Dobby to play Exploding Snap. "He's made us all better, I think. More complete." As the afternoon stretched into evening, and Harry's birthday celebration gradually wound down, the family gathered in the library for their traditional evening reading. It had become a cherished ritual, all 4 of them curled up in the comfortable chairs by the fireplace, while Narcissa read aloud from whatever book they'd chosen for the week. Tonight, in honor of Harry's birthday, they'd selected a collection of stories about magical families and the bonds that held them together. As Narcissa's melodious voice filled the warm room, Harry reflected on how much his life had changed since that night when Dobby had found him locked in a cupboard and decided to act on his conscience. He thought about the scared, hollow child he'd been, convinced he was worthless, desperate for any scrap of affection, certain that he deserved whatever cruelty was heaped upon him. That boy felt like a stranger now, someone Harry could barely remember being. In his place was a confident, loved child who knew his own worth, who spoke up for himself and others, who understood that love was not something to be earned, but something to be freely given and received. "Harry?" Narcissa's voice broke through his reverie. "You're very quiet tonight. What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Harry looked around at the faces of his family, Narcissa with her gentle smile and fierce maternal love, Lucius with his quiet pride and unexpected tenderness, Draco with his bright affection and loyal heart. These people had saved him in every way it was possible to be saved. "I was just thinking," he said softly, "about how different everything is now. A year ago, I thought I would never have a real family. I thought I would spend my whole life being unwanted and alone. And now you're stuck with us forever," Draco finished with a grin. "No returns, no exchanges, no escape." "Good," Harry said firmly. "I don't want to escape. I want to stay here with you and learn magic and grow up to be someone you can be proud of." "Oh, my darling boy," Narcissa whispered, her eyes bright with tears. "We're already so proud of you. Not because of what you might become, but because of who you are right now. Our son, our family, our greatest joy." "Speaking of the future," Lucius said, with the kind of thoughtful expression that usually meant he'd been planning something, "I think it's time we started discussing what you might like to study when you get to Hogwarts. Your magical aptitude tests suggest you have particular strengths in several areas." "Like what?" Harry asked eagerly. "Potions, naturally. You have your mother's intuitive understanding of magical brewing. Transfiguration shows promise as well, and your connection to growing things suggests you'll excel in herbology. But most remarkably, your scores in defense against the dark arts theory are extraordinary for someone your age." "Defense against the dark arts," Harry repeated thoughtfully. "That's about protecting people, isn't it?" "Among other things, yes." "I think I'd like that," Harry said quietly. "Learning to protect people. Making sure other children don't get hurt the way I was hurt." The room fell silent for a moment, and when Narcissa spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "That's a worthy goal, sweetheart. A noble calling. But remember, you don't have to save everyone to be valuable. You don't have to fix the whole world to be loved." "I know," Harry said, with the wisdom of someone who had learned hard truths about love and worth. "But if I can help, if I can make things better for other children who are scared and alone, wouldn't that be a good way to use whatever gifts I have?" "It would be a beautiful way," Lucius agreed softly. "But that's a decision for the future, Harry. Right now, your job is simply to be 9 years old, to learn and grow and be happy." "I can do that," Harry said with a bright smile. "I'm very good at being happy now." As the evening drew to a close, and it came time for bed, Harry found himself reluctant to let the day end. Birthdays at the manor had proven to be extraordinary affairs, but this one felt especially precious, a milestone marking not just another year of life, but a full year of love and healing and growth. "Thank you," he said, as Narcissa tucked him into bed and smoothed the covers around him. "For everything. For saving me. For loving me. For making me part of your family." "Thank you," she replied, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "For letting us love you. For trusting us with your heart. For making our family complete." "Will you tell me a story?" Harry asked, even though he was getting a bit old for bedtime stories. "Something about families that choose each other?" "I know just the one," Narcissa said with a smile, settling into the chair beside his bed. "Once upon a time, there was a little boy who thought he was all alone in the world." As her voice wove the familiar magic of storytelling through the quiet room, Harry closed his eyes and listened to the tale of a child who found his true family not through blood or destiny, but through love and choice, and the courage to believe he deserved better. Outside his window, the stars wheeled across the summer sky above Malfoy Manor, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted softly in the ancient oak trees that had stood sentinel over this estate for centuries. The world was vast and full of possibilities, full of adventures waiting and dreams yet to be realized. But here, in this moment, in this room painted like a summer sky, Harry Potter Malfoy was exactly where he belonged, safe and loved, and home at last. The boy who lived had become the boy who was